Isis Audiobooks presents an unabridged recording of Blood, Salt, Water, written by Denise Mina, read by Kathleen McCarran. The moral right of the author has been asserted. This performance is owned by Isis Publishing Limited. All of us have in our veins the exact same percentage of salt in our blood that exists in the ocean. And therefore we have salt in our blood, in our sweat, in our tears. We are tied to the ocean. And when we go back to the sea, whether it is to sail or to watch it, we are going back from whence we came. John F. Kennedy. Chapter 1. She'd been as biddable as a heifer for the 2 days they had her. She came willingly when they picked her up in the van. She asked no favours, made no appeals for mercy while they waited for wee Paul to give the final word, kill her or let her go. At first Ian was pleased that she was passive. He'd never had to muscle a woman before. Then he began to wonder why. She didn't seem frightened at all. She even smiled sometimes. She only spoke once, to ask a question. How much longer will it be? Slowly they began to realise that she had completely misunderstood what was going on. Tommy smirked when he worked it out, nodding at Ian behind her back, laughing at her. It wasn't funny to Ian. The longer it went on, the worse he felt about it. It was dishonourable, but he couldn't very well warn her or let her go. The deception made him so uncomfortable that a couple of times, in the long last night, he was tempted to just get up and leave. He couldn't. He had to see the job through to pay the debt. Screw the nut and see it through. After wee Paul called this morning and gave Tommy the decision, Ian couldn't look at her anymore. They put her back in the van and drove from Helensburgh to Loch Lomond. Out of the van, under a rain-threatening sky, low grey clouds muting all the colours on the mountains. They marched in single file through high sand dunes, Tommy leading, her in the middle, Ian behind, following a zigzag path through to the loch side. The sand dunes were industrial dumps, destined for a golf course, neon yellow and very high. She turned to look at the glinting sand, and Ian saw the apple of her cheek swell in a small smile. What was she thinking about? About warm holidays on yellow beaches, maybe? Blue seas, suntans? She still had no idea. Ian put his hand in his pocket and touched the cosh. He wouldn't hurt her face. She had a nice face. He'd make it as quick as possible. She flinched at a bitter wind off the water as she stepped out onto the loch side. Then she looked up. Her step faltered at the sight of the boat. She sagged at the knees, lifted her face and screamed a rasping animal shriek, sore on the ear because it was so close. Tommy spun back, reaching for her mouth to shut her up, but she flailed her arms, squawking, "No!" in little breathy bursts. They were astonished by the fight in her. She turned, shoulder-shoving Tommy until she knocked him off balance, trying to get past. Tommy wheeled on his heels, grabbing at her even as he fell. His hand slipped down her hip. He was on his knees and she made it past him. She got 2 long steps around him, heading down the dock, running for the thick line of trees. Ian was a big man with a long reach. He grabbed her upper arm, pulled the cosh from his pocket and turned her to him. He hit her on the jaw as hard as he could. Her head snapped back on her neck. Her eyes rolled. She slithered to the ground as if filled with sand herself. Then she lay on the dock, gracelessly folded over one of her legs. An old prison trick. You might hit someone hard, but hit wrong and a man could just turn back to you, angry and ready. For a knockout, the head had to whip round fast. It made the brain bang against the inside of the skull. Make the head move fast enough, and you could almost guarantee a drop. Ian and Tommy stood looking down at her. Tommy was panting, scared. Ian was surprised he didn't hide it better. They didn't really know each other, hadn't worked together before. They were still laying out their stalls. Tommy was doing a TV baddie, swearing, growling. Ian was being the most frightening men in prison, expressionless hard nuts who gave no warning before they went for you. Looking down at the unconscious woman, he thought of those men. He envied them. They never seemed to feel anything. He wondered now if their blank eyes hid a despair so profound it squeezed the air from their lungs, if self-disgust weighed like a brick in their guts. Probably not. They watched an egg-shaped lump rise on her jaw. The movement of her chest was faltering. Her eyes flickered behind the lids. Unconscious, but not dead. The plan had been to get here, drove her to the boat, maybe even get her quite far out on the water before they killed her. Tommy growled. "Don't just leave her there. Fucking finish." He was right. She could wake up and that would be beyond cruel because it would still need to be done, but she'd know. Ian bent down fast. It was a mistake born of compassion. A burning hot needle stab in his lower vertebrae made him groan. Embarrassed, he straightened up. He tried again, keeping his spine straight, lowering himself down on one knee as if he was being knighted. He got all the way down and settled into the pose, shifting his pelvis in tiny movements, forward and back, testing the limits. His sore back was new, the pains random, not yet mapped. He ground his teeth as he lifted the cosh over his head and brought it down again and again, the way he used to cull fish when he was a boy. He did it on the top of her head, going in through the hair so that he didn't damage her face. It was the only mercy he could afford her. Whatever she had done, however much Ian needed the job, she deserved to keep her face. Tommy looked away, affecting disinterest, staring at the boat. He pointed over at the peeling 12-footer slapping against the dockside on the choppy grey loch. The CJ2 didn't look like much. "Check the fucking state of it," he said, overplaying his interest in the state of the boat because he couldn't watch. "The paint's all fucking peely." Tommy didn't know shit about boats. The boat was sound. It was done. A halo of scarlet bloomed around her head. Ian found he was panting and his knee hurt terribly. His whole body weight was pressing through it onto the rippled concrete. He leaned over the woman's body to push himself up, forming a windbreak over her. In the vacuum, he glanced at her face, close enough to see her without the swollen jaw or the bloody wound on her head. Quite suddenly, he saw her as a woman. Maybe a woman he knew once, or loved. He couldn't place her, but it made her a person, and she hadn't been until now. Until now, she'd been an awkward chore. One of those things you had to do but couldn't bring yourself to think about. Leaning on his hand and bending his elbow to lever himself up brought him closer yet. He felt warmth radiate from her cheek. Motherly dew from her breath settled on his eyelids. His ear was just inches from her mouth. He wouldn't have heard her otherwise. From deep inside her came a sound. Sheila. His mother's name. Shocked, he reeled back. As his mouth aligned with hers, he gasped and sucked in her warm, wet, last breath. He sucked it deep down into his lungs. Ian scrambled to his feet. He stepped away, hands up, surrendering. No, that was stupid. Sheila. Not his mother's name, just sounds from a body. Not Sheila. Sheila. Not real. But his lips were damp with her, his airways full of the screaming of her. The loch clawed at the dockside. Gulls skirled an indignant dirge high overhead. A handful of sand pattered on her face, lifted by the lamenting wind. "You finished?" Tommy was keeping his eyes on the boat. "Is that you done?" Ian opened his mouth to speak, but shut it again. He didn't want to speak because he didn't know what would come out of him. All the fight she'd had left in her, all her everything, had gone into him. It had risen up, leaving her body, and he had sucked it in. Her soul. Now she was trapped inside him. She was writhing and angry and flailing, and she would burn her way out through his guts. Chapter 2. Alex Morrow's work phone rang loud and shrill on the passenger seat. "Roxana's missing, ma'am," said McGreen, one of her DCs. "We lost visual at school drop-off yesterday and didn't find her again. She's just been reported missing by an anonymous caller." "What? Who called?" "We don't know. It was a child's voice, English accent." "One of her kids?" Morrow was holding the phone on the steering wheel and shouting at it. She was breaking the law, but that wasn't why she was shouting. She was personally invested in the fate of Roxana Fuentesilla. "He's done it, hasn't he? Shit! The fucking boyfriend!" "Well, we don't know who called. Sounds like one of the children." "I'll be there in 10 minutes. She hung up and hurried through the mid-morning traffic to London Road Police Station. The car park was full, but she had a reserved space. She got out and locked the car, walking quickly to the back door, giving herself a talking to. She should calm down. She'd never even met Fuentesilla. Whatever Morrow admired about her was just conjecture. She'd watched a lot of footage, but that didn't give a fully rounded picture at all. She was a crim. Remember that. Us and them. Through the back bar and the entrance to the holding cells, Morrow gave the desk sergeant a quick nod and a hello. She hurried through the locker rooms and cut across the lobby. Opening her office door, she bolted her bag to the leg of her desk, doubled back across the corridor to the incident room, and found McGreen. He was leaning on a desk, sipping a mug of tea and listening to DC Thankless, a bald, muscled man with an aggravating manner. Morrow didn't like him. "Jeez, ho!" McGreen stood up straight when he saw her. "That was quick. Come in here." McGreen followed her into her office and closed the door after himself. "This is not a canteen." She was looking at the mug of tea in his hand. Embarrassed, he ducked back out, left it on the nearest table in the incident room and slipped back into her office. "Sorry, ma'am." "Sit down." She pointed to the chair. "Now tell me." So he told her. They'd lost visual contact with Roxana Fuentesilla yesterday after she'd dropped her kids at school. She always came home from her office at the same time, but last night she hadn't been seen going into the house. Nothing suspicious, though. The lights went on as usual in the front room, the kitchen, her bedroom. Her car wasn't there either, but she was known to park in another street sometimes when it was busy. They had been following her for 3 weeks. They lost her sometimes and hadn't thought much of it. It would be too expensive to physically follow her. Budget cuts had reduced them to doing their own filing and rationing biros, so they'd been relying on CCTV. They watched a lot of street cam footage. Fuentesilla was not considered a flight risk because of her kids. They were 14 and 12, at a good school, clean and fed and thriving. She clearly adored them. Overnight, the CCTV from all the usual sources had been checked. There wasn't a single frame of Fuentesilla yesterday. Then, at 7 this morning, a call, anonymous, from a phone box in Central Station. A voice, small and young, reported Roxana Fuentesilla missing since yesterday. When the operator asked if the caller had any idea where she might be, they said they didn't know where they've taken her, which suggested more than one person, so not the boyfriend in a blind rage. Then the phone cut out abruptly. "One of our kids," said Morrow. "Yeah, the English accent sounded posh, kind of drawly. Can't be that common up here." "CCTV of the phone box in Central Station?" "Asked for it and it's on its way." "Good. Send me the audio of the call. Notify the chief's office. They'll set a meeting." "Yes, ma'am." And then Migraine was gone. She shut the door and turned on her computer. It booted up slowly. She felt her customary cheerful serotonin spark, as she did every morning now, at the thought of following Roxana Fuentesilla, but corrected her chemical self. There was no footage today. Roxana was missing. She felt as if her favourite show had been cancelled. The case had become a soap opera for her. A story with a lot of money and super good-looking people doing fun things and having arguments. Fuentesilla herself was hilariously argumentative. She was from Madrid, from a rich family who'd squandered a fortune. For a number of reasons, not all of them her fault, Fuentesilla had been left penniless and seemed to be trying to set up some sort of mysterious criminal scam involving £7 million of someone else's money. She was supposed to be keeping a low profile, but it was always smashing jars in shops that incurred her wrath, shouting at her boyfriend in the supermarket, or bawling in Spanish at other parents outside the school for parking irresponsibly. Her relationship with her live-in boyfriend was stormy. Though not actually known to be violent, it seemed inevitable that it would be. Fuentesilla had issues in the area of dispute resolution. Still, 7 million was serious money, suggesting she was working with serious people. Morrow shouldn't have warm feelings about her. The desktop resolved on screen. Doleful, she glanced at the fresh files of CCTV. She usually clicked on them first, but there was no point today. Opening her email instead, she found the emergency call file already there. She plugged in her earphones, clicked, and listened. It was a child's voice, a posh English accent. They spoke calmly at first, the sound almost drowned out by the background hum of the station. When the operator asked them to spell Roxana Fuentesilla, they did so fluently and gave her home address and postcode without hesitation. "She's been missing since yesterday morning," the caller said. "I'm worried she's been killed or something." At the word killed, they faltered and were breathless for the rest of the call. The operator asked if the caller knew where Fuentesilla might have gone. I don't know where they've taken her." The operator asked again, "Can you give me your name and address?" But this time the caller hung up. Morrow felt sure it was one of the kids. She remembered the bakery incident. Not the boy. Please, not that wee boy. Police Scotland only went into the bakery to find out what had happened, because Fuentesilla was taken from there to accident and emergency in an ambulance. Suspected broken ankle, really just a very bad sprain. Morrow and her team had watched the CCTV from behind the counter over and over, just for entertainment. Mother and son coming in, boy cowed, mother furious, he must have done something very bad. Roxana bought and paid for a Victoria sponge cake, pulled it out of the box, and hit him in the face with it. Mother and son stood laughing at each other in the shop, bits of cake dropping off his cheeks onto the tiled floor. Then the boy wiped a big lump off his cheek and hit her back, and she laughed so hard that she slipped on the cream-splattered tiles, fell over and hurt herself. Morrow thought of his cream and jam-smeared face, of laughter tears rolling down his cheeks. Not that wee boy, please. McGrain was at her office door. We've got the film from Central. I can't send it to you without compressing it. Do you want to just come and see? Of course. Like a lot of technical things, Morrow didn't really know what compressing meant. She wondered it might undermine her authority to keep on admitting it, so she just followed him to his desk. Chapter 3. Boyd Fraser was chopping fresh mint leaves with a large twin-bladed mezzaluna. In Italy, mezzalunas were the tool of underchefs with no knife skills, but no one here knew that. In Helensburgh, a twee Scottish seaside town, the mezzaluna was a sophisticated novelty. Feeling himself watched by one particular customer in the cafe, Boyd chopped for longer than the mint needed, getting into the rolling rhythm, working the green mint oil into a large olive wood board. He wanted to look up and make sure the customer was really watching, but he didn't. They might not be watching, might just have their face pointed in his direction. Anyway, he didn't need their fucking approval to chuck a bowl of tabbouleh together. He knew a lot of people came to eat here, paid the high prices, because of what was implied by eating in the Paddle Cafe. Organic, local, farmer's market, nose to tail, seasonal. All the hollow pro words I used to give a fuck about. It was an underground movement when Boyd got into it. At one time he'd cared with the same fevered certainty his minister father had for his faith. Past heresy, his father used to say, was present orthodoxy. The food revolutionaries now found themselves unwilling high priests of a bland new consensus. His wife, Lucy, got very drunk at a friend's wedding once. Just before she threw up into a rhododendron bush that was older than her grandmother, she said that a cafe with a mission statement was utter bollocks. Boyd liked her that night. Not just loved her, he always loved her, but he really liked her. If they'd met for the first time that night, he would have fallen in love with her right there and then. The mission statement was printed on the Paddle menus. Even the takeaway menu had a mission statement on it. Bringing organic eggs, blah, blah, blah. Supporting our local blah, blah, blah. He knew that the blah, blah was their profit margin. Customers only paid $5.50 for 6 eggs because of the blah, blah. Boyd chanced a glance up. The watchful customer still had her eyes trained on him through the glass display case. An older woman, but everyone in this town was old. Sharp, greying bob, cornflower blue eyes, expensive sweater and mustard cashmere. She had a very long, straight nose pinched at the end. Her blue neck scarf was pinned with a Victorian brooch, opals and diamonds, inherited. She was smiling at him, her eyebrows raised in recognition. He didn't know her. Taking their brief eye contact as a prompt, she stood up and sidled around a display crate of organic local seasonal tomatoes. Boyd, it's Susan Grierson. He reeled at the sound of her voice. Miss Grierson? For goodness! He stumbled around the counter to her, a boy again, thrilled to see his old Akela from Scouts, his very first sailing instructor. He sandwiched her hand in both of his, wanted to hug her, but knowing it would be too much. You're back! I am, she said, the warmth of her smile meeting his. My mother died. Boyd hadn't heard that, and he usually knew these things. The cafe was a hub of local news. Oh, I'm sorry, he said. Me too. My father. Your father? Well, that must have been a well-attended funeral. She meant his father's congregation, not friends, certainly not family. In fact, the turnout was poor. Most of them were very old. My mother's funeral was pitiful. Miss Grierson looked tearfully at the floor, shaking a little, as if she'd forced her mother to be old and lonely by going out into the world. Lots of people came back here after a death. Grief and dislocation took them all differently, but everyone felt guilty. Sad and guilty. There was no use in it. Boyd tried to help her out. So, where have you been living? US. I was in the Hamptons for 20 years. What's that like? Quite like Helensburgh, in fact. Lovely, gentle people. Changed a lot now, though. She looked sad but lilted her voice as if trying to lever her mood. Then London for a while. The sadness lingered, joined by what looked like wet-eyed anxiety. So... Well, I was in London too, said Boyd kindly. 15 years. Glad to get out in the end. He was leaving it open for her to denounce London, as people who left it often did. It usually cheered them up, but she didn't take the bait. Where were you living in London, Boyd? Crouch End. I knew it. She smiled and looked around the Paddle's interior. Hamble and Hamble? Ah. Boyd gave a cheeky grin. You've found me out. I knew it. I lived right next door in Highgate. When I walked in here, I knew it was a copy because of the local produce oath on the menus. I can picture you in Hamble's. You've even used the same colour of faro and ball paint. She nodded at the walls. Don't they mind? Well, he looked at the wooden shelving, displaying retro-style olive oil drums, the tumbling basket of sourdough bread and the string of brown paper bags hanging from a bare nail hammered into the wall. They don't know. They would know if they came in, but they won't come in. Because no one came here. At least no one Boyd was very interested in. I'm so glad to be back now, in time for the independence referendum. Boyd knew then that she was just back. With 3 weeks until the vote, no one else was glad. Those in favour of independence could hardly wait another minute, and the other side just wanted it to be over. Miss Grierson raised her eyebrows, waiting for him to say whether he was pro or anti. Boyd didn't. He ran a business, for fuck's sake. He couldn't afford to take a public position and alienate customers on the other side. He raised his eyebrows back at her, and she changed the subject. And I was so pleased when I saw you did gluten-free bread. Miss Grierson got that look in her eye then, a look of mild martyrdom Boyd recognised as the presage to the biography of an allergy. He zoned out on the details, but she seemed to be hitting all the narrative points. Found I wasn't actually celiac, but certainly had a very strong reaction. Boyd's mind wandered again. He was thinking about giving up the gluten-free range. A big Waitrose had opened nearby and they did it cheaper. He didn't want to have to listen to this story 3 times a day anymore. Allergy bastards, he called them in his head and to Lucy. Allergy bastards bought all the bread today, he'd say while they were watching telly. Or had to chuck all the gluten-free out because not enough allergy bastards came in. They didn't seem to be able to buy the stuff without telling him about their Damascene journey. He'd spotted a gap in the market. It didn't mean he wanted to keep a chart of their colon function. Miss Grierson had stopped talking. She looked at him quizzically, sensing his disengagement. So, he said, how long have you been back, Miss Grierson? She hesitated, probably meaning to tell him to call her Susan, but decided not to for some reason. Recently, going through her things. Sad? She looked sad. No, she was very old. A lot to do in the house, though. Garden's a mess. The Griersons' garden was a huge lot in the middle of town, 3/4 of an acre. A small estate, really. He used to pass it on adolescent runs in the summer. Giant Scots pines with trunks the colour of ginger snaps, 100-foot lawn and a big walled vegetable garden at the back. He'd been passing again recently, out running or walking Jimbo, but the walls were high and even the hedge breaks were overgrown. He couldn't see in any more. "Well," he said, "you'll know that most of those big gardens have been sectioned and sold off for new builds. Bear that in mind when you're selling." "Oh, I'm not selling. I'm moving back." Boyd smiled. "I've moved back." "We're all moving back, aren't we? The old pack." "Seems that way. I see a lot of old faces in here." She touched his elbow in a comradely manner. "Our age." Though he was only 35, younger than her by a good 15 years. Suddenly conscious of all that needed to be done before lunch, Boyd let his weight shift to his back foot, moving behind the counter. "Do you still sail?" "No, our boathouse is empty now. Mother sold them when I left for the States." "We have a boat, if you'd like to go out." The offer was no sooner out of his mouth than he wished it back. He saw her eyes widen, wonder, file the invitation away for possible use later. Boyd didn't sail for company. He was dreading his boys being old enough to go out with him. "Maybe, another time," she said. "Thanks, Boyd. It's kind of you." He wanted to change the subject. "Were you and Akela out in the States?" "No," she said. "I gave it up when I moved. I loved it, though, while I did it. Gave me real confidence." "Leader of the pack?" "I'm not much of a leader, but, you know," she warmed at the memory. "It gave me such courage just to go off and do things. Super thing for a young woman to have, that confidence. Good for me. My mother made me do it because I didn't go to uni with my friends, you know. Do something, Susan." Miss Grierson launched into a dull reminiscence about her mother, giving her advice, and how it was good advice or something, but Boyd wasn't listening anymore. He picked up the Mezzaluna again, holding it loosely with one hand. It was a prompt to her to say goodbye, but she was talking without heeding the listener, rolling through a story to please herself, the way old people did. Boyd raised the Mezzaluna slowly, waiting until the end of the story. She got there, looked at the knife, and then around the shop. "So," she said vaguely, "do you have a job for me?" Very American, forthright and unembarrassed. Quite unattractive. "You can't need the money." He looked at the teenage waitresses on the floor and dropped his voice to a murmur. "Miss Grierson, the money I pay is crap." She smiled. "Call me Susan, please." "No, but I need to do something. I can't bear the thought of working in a charity shop. The people in them are all my age. I like a mix." Boyd grinned at her. Every second shop in the town was a charity shop. They were staffed by retired people volunteering for a few hours a week. Most of their stock came from post-mortem house clearances and the ring of old folks' homes that circled the town, ornaments and personal effects the families didn't want back after. He leaned in and whispered, "It's the half-dead selling the knickknacks of the dead to the almost dead." They both tittered, she with shock at his maliciousness, he with discomfort. He'd said it often, but he wished he hadn't said it now. It was quite nasty, and she was decent, so it mattered. "That's what people call it here, anyway." He was lying. The line was his. She looked uncomfortable. It's a bit mean. Boyd pretended to think about it for the first time. Actually, it is a bit mean. I could do with a hand tomorrow evening, if you're free. She seemed disconcerted by that and looked around the cafe. Are you open in the evenings? No, we're catering a dinner dance at the Victoria Halls, charity, raising money for a children's hospice. I need someone to stand with a clipboard and mark off the tables as they get served. Time it so that no one is waiting too long between courses. Think you can do that? He saw her fingers close over the edge of an imaginary clipboard. Yes, she said. I think I can manage that, yes. Righto, Miss Grierson. Be here at 5:30 then, and wear black. Please, Boyd, call me Susan. No, he said firmly. I like Miss Grierson. Chapter 4. In the van, driving back. Tommy and Ian were heading out of the wild, back to Helensburgh, on a road that cut through the chocolate box Scotland. On high, rugged hills, mist clung to the lochans, and the rain blackened the stone cliffs. Ian had a barb in his throat. The lassie, the dead lassie, her breath was stuck in there, a cough about to happen. Why did she go with them? What did she think was going to happen? Ian felt the catch in his throat throb and tighten, as if she was trying to explain to him. He tried to reason himself out of the mood. This is a good thing, he told himself. It was done now, and the debt paid. But it didn't shift the contamination deep in the core of him. You're very quiet. Tommy accelerated on a sharp turn, making the chassis of the old van groan. Did that do your head in? A smile was tugging at the corner of his mouth. Tommy got a wild buzz from acting like a gangster, but he wasn't one. He'd never been in prison. Ian knew what he would have been like, cowering in his cell at association, hand-washing some thug's underpants in return for protection. Ian had done long time. He was always wait for a bigger man and had done his time with dignity. He'd been out for 8 months now, but he still had the head of a passman. Passman, a prisoner trusted to dole out cleaning products and pens. The passman was halfway between screws and prisoners. They were the moral compromise that kept the whole system working, the vilified keepers of order. Everyone felt superior to them. Ian knew that, but everyone colluded in the compromise because everyone wanted something. Keeping order didn't include killing a woman. That was a different thing. Did it? Said Tommy. Do you not in? Ian shook his head. Here, she won't just wash up on the beach outside the kitty rides at Loch Lomond Shores, will she? She wouldn't. Loch Lomond was a mile deep in some places. There was nowhere to go but down. Sailors without life vests, swimmers and weekend canoeists got sucked under by the eddies and were paralysed by the cold from the deep water. They didn't come up for weeks. Sometimes they never came up. Ian looked at his hands. Her blood was watery on his cuffs, under his nails. It was one of the few bits of concrete advice Sheila ever gave him, and he'd forgotten it when it mattered. Salt water lifts blood. Only salt water. It was a freshwater loch. After they dropped her over the side of the boat, Ian looked at his bloody hands. He wanted to be clean and plunged his hands into the water. He had expected warmth, the sensation of putting his hands under a duvet on a cold winter morning, but the water was scaldingly cold. He yanked his burning hands back out, contracted into claws, and stood panting with shock, bloody water running down his forearms. His hands looked unfamiliar, like someone else's. And now his cuffs were drying in the heat of the van, turning crusty. They drove on, passing a Waitrose lorry. I was in that Waitrose. Dunno what all the fuss is about. Tommy was determined to chat. You coming to the dinner dance? Ian looked at him. Tomorrow night? Tommy licked the corner of his mouth, keeping his eyes on the road. Got your ticket? Ian nodded. The Children's Hospice dinner dance. Ian had forgotten. He did have a ticket. Everyone had a ticket. Mark Barrett made it clear everyone had to go. He wanted everyone to attend because his niece wasn't well and it was a good cause. Wee Paul, Mark's second, nagged and nagged until everyone could prove they'd bought a ticket. They did whatever Mark wanted. Mark wasn't going. He was away in Barcelona while the deed with the woman got done. Alibi. Privilege of management, he said. Hey, you thought about yes yet? Bairns not bombs, eh? Thought about that? Tommy was forever trying to bring up the independence referendum, pushing yes. The naval base nearby meant there were nuclear bombs barely a mile down the coast. The independence camp had vowed to get rid of them and spend all the money on nurseries or something. That's what we're about. The future. Hope, yeah? Ian nodded. He just agreed with everyone. He'd never voted. He wasn't registered. Mark said they were all to vote against it. He said independence would interfere with his business in Europe. You're not talking, buddy. Ian didn't say anything. He was so low he wasn't sure he could speak. Ah, well, you may be just tired. Just tired. It was weird that Tommy chose that phrase, said it the way Sheila used to. Ian wasn't thinking about her exactly, but he felt as if he'd just been about to. It was stupid what he'd thought the woman said, but it was as if Sheila was determined to come back into his head, and this time she did it through Tommy. Just tired. When Ian was young, if he came in with bloody fists or a sore face or a bag of something he had no business having and he didn't want to tell her what or why, she always said maybe he was just tired and made him a wee cup of tea. Sheila died so young he didn't have the time to think of her as anything but his mother. The only time he ever thought of her as a person in her own right, as having anything that wasn't him or about him, was as he stood in the pew at her cremation. Some guy was talking about Jesus. Not a priest, though that's what she would have wanted. Behind closed red curtains, a squeaky wheel signalled the lowering of her coffin. Ian wondered what would happen to the metal plates in her head. What temperature would they cremate her body at? Would it melt the metal, or would it just burn everything else around it? He imagined the skull they were attached to melting like butter in a pan, and the plates collapsing towards each other, tired sides on a house. Just tired. Metal plates in her head and jaw. The guy who hit her wasn't Ian's dad, he was just some guy. Early in her life, Sheila declared herself unlucky in love, and then went on to pick arsehole after arsehole. Every time Ian met a new one, even if the guy seemed nice or gave him sweets, he knew that he would turn out to be an arsehole. There was one guy who tried to touch him, and Ian didn't have the words to tell, but Sheila worked it out somehow. She told the local heavies, and they broke the man's arms and ankles. He never came back to the town. Heavies were heroes to Ian. They were order and justice to him. They were the passmen of outside. Ian was allowed to visit her in hospital after the plates were fitted. Her head was bandaged, her jaws wired. She sat up in the bed, unable to speak. Ian was exactly 7 years and 3 months old. He knew that for sure because much later a lawyer in some case brought it up as a plea in mitigation. Severe head injury. 7 years and 3 months when the social worker brought him to the intensive care ward and stood at the door to the room, watching to make sure he was okay, not too frightened by the machines or Sheila's bandages in her wired-up jaw. Ian was fine with it. He was only there to show off to the other foster kids. He had a parent who wanted to see him, and they didn't need social work supervision for visits. His mum didn't want to hit him. His mum really liked him and could make food and dinners and clean his clothes and everything. The other kids in the foster home were spitting with envy. Sheila's eyes brimmed with joy at the sight of him, and Ian ran over to her bedside. She couldn't talk. She held up a hand, warning him not to touch her face or head. She rolled her eyes to show him it was sore. Oof! She made the noise with her throat because she couldn't move her lips or tongue. Then she smiled with her eyes to show it was okay. Ian hugged her toes, staying as far away from her head as he could. He squeezed her toes and kissed them through the rough hospital blankets, and Sheila watched him and crinkled her eyes to show him that she liked it. Then her eyes invited him to sit on the bed with her and cuddle in and watch the telly, and he did. He lay his head on her belly and she stroked his hair with lazy fingers, and he listened, half to the giggle of her guts, half to the news on the telly. After, when the wires were taken out, Sheila stayed, not talking much. She shrugged. What is there to say? She had a point. Ian looked out of the van window at the massive hills, the snow caps and the veils of mist, hearing Sheila's guts giggling in one ear and Tommy's nasal breathing in the other. I'll bang some tunes on then, said Tommy, a bit huffy that Ian wasn't for talking. He touched the play button and Fiddy's I'm Supposed to Die Tonight filled the cabin. The bass made the ill-fitting windows buzz. Tommy bobbed his head to the beat. Ian recognised that this wasn't new. He'd felt this before, this distance from the world. It reminded him of Andrew Cole, because he'd been there then. Ian and Andrew were in prison together and had nothing in common. Andrew was posh and read all the time, but he said a nice thing to Ian at a time when it mattered. You'll be all right. Just try and act normal. A kindness in a time of despair. The words and the tenderness stayed with Ian. A prison tattoo, ink in a ragged cut. Just act normal. He heard the music and tried to follow the sequence of the melody, but he was off the beat, jerking his head out of time as if he was rehearsing smashing his face on the dashboard. He stopped, distracted by a tiny shift. The barb was gone from his throat. She had moved down, deep down into the dark. There was nowhere to go but down. But she wasn't paralysed by the cold. He felt her move, uncoiling in the dark spaces. Faced to the window so Tommy couldn't see, Ian shut his brimming eyes and shrugged a shoulder, resigned. She was going to bite her way out through his chest. She would be the death of him, but he didn't care. The debt was paid, and he was spent. Save him the bother of doing it himself. Chapter 5. Central Station had sent 2 footage files, both an hour and a half long. McGrain had scrolled through both to 7:03:32 a.m, 10 seconds before the call came through. He pulled up the first. A very wide shot of the concourse and 5 platforms, with a bank of phone boxes in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. Obscuring the view of the phones was an out-of-focus forest of what looked like erect grey pipe cleaners. Morrow squinted at them. What is that? McGrain touched the screen. Unfortunate. Anti-pigeon spikes. Stop them landing. They're all furry with dust from the station. Is the other one a better shot? Pointing in the wrong direction. I'm so hoping this isn't the wee cake guy, she said quietly. McGrain nodded heavily. God, me too. They stood still for a moment, smiling sadly at the screen as they each remembered the mother and the child and the cake and the contagious silent laughter. Morrow was the first to pull herself out of it. She pointed at the screen. Come on then. McGrain clicked play. A grainy smear of movement, people walking, standing facing the giant information screen. The image was grey but for orange beacon lights flashing on a mobility cart in the distance. The camera was pinned above the entrance to a shop. A small figure in a dark green parka, fur-trimmed hood up, walked in from the bottom right. They went straight to a phone box, picked up the handset and dropped a coin in. The person they were looking for had dialed the free emergency number, so Morrow wasn't sure it was their caller. But then the hooded figure reached into the slot for a returned coin. They were talking into the handset. Teenager, said Morrow, looking at the skinny-leg grey jeans under the baggy parka. Teenage boy, said McGrain, pointing at the back pockets sagging halfway down his legs. The caller was getting agitated, looking left, stepping from foot to foot. They hung up suddenly at 7:04:09, exact to the second for the audio time. They hesitated, hand resting on the receiver, and then scurried off, head down under the hood as if they were crying. McGrain pressed pause and they both looked at the screen. It was hard to tell if it was the boy. They didn't really know how tall he was and they'd never heard his voice. It sounded more like a girl, but the jeans seemed boyish. The second file of footage showed the same action but was less in focus. Did you ask for the other cam views? Said Morrow. Maybe we can get the face. I know one of the guys over there. He checked the 3 exits in that direction. Found them leaving, hood still up. Got in a waiting taxi, but we can't read their edge. Why not? Camera hood's broken. It's hanging in front of the lens. Morrow nodded. Typical. It had to be the cake boy. They couldn't see his face, but Roxana had a teenage boy, and a teenage boy had called them. They should go and speak to the kids immediately, but they couldn't. They couldn't do anything. They needed permission. Pinad, said McGrain. Morrow nodded. Fucking Pinad. She went back to her office to await instructions, pending the chief superintendent's office getting in and bothering to call her. She felt miserable and wanted to check the CCTV anyway, even though she knew Roxana wasn't on it. She wondered why she was so involved with this woman, wondered if Roxana was filling a space in her head that Danny usually filled. Danny McGrath was Morrow's half-brother. He was a well-known and feared Glasgow gangster until he was sentenced to 8 years for conspiracy to commit murder. Morrow didn't think he was funny or sweet or strangely admirable, not the way she thought about Fuentesilla, but he did preoccupy her to the same degree. Once or twice a day Danny came into her mind, and Fuentesilla had started to fill those spaces. One big similarity, she realised, was her feeling of impotence about both of them. She wasn't even allowed to brief the Pinad team on the woman's disappearance until she had word from on high. She busied herself with duty forms and background files for other cases, waiting. The Pinad case began 6 months ago, and 400 miles away, with a fishing exercise. The Met were monitoring a boozy Park Lane charity auction for money laundering activities. It was a good place to look for ostentatious spending, rich people showing off to other rich people in a drinking environment. The Met's curiosity was piqued when a barman and his unemployed girlfriend paid £64,000 for Cabinet, a Larkin & Sons design icon. The Pinad incident room had a picture of it on the wall. According to the description in the auction catalogue, it was handcrafted rosewood, inlaid with walnut and ebony marquetry, made by master craftsmen. 64 grand's worth of ugly wall unit, as far as Morrow was concerned. The Met began a minimal investigation into the couple. They found that the boyfriend, Robin Walker, worked as a barman in a private dining club in Belgravia. Roxana Fuentesilla had no income. She had no inheritance. She had never worked. Robin Walker was not the children's father. He had moved in with Roxana Fuentesilla just over a year ago, following a whirlwind romance. Their natural father, Miguel Vicente, came from an absurdly wealthy Ecuadorian family. 3 years ago, he left the family home with an overnight bag and flew back home to Ecuador. A month later, he married a fellow absurdly rich Ecuadorian. She had a plastic surgery ski jump nose and a zoo in her garden. Pictured in an online society magazine, the couple were a bizarre sight for Scottish eyes. Their teeth looked as if they had stolen them from a child. Both had their eyebrows plucked. Both had shiny, line-free skin. Vicente stopped supporting Roxana and the kids a month after he left. Robin Walker was handsome, directionless, and in his late 20s. He lived with his new family in a serviced flat in Belgravia. Despite their straitened circumstances, they wintered in St. Lucia. Roxana continued to educate her children alongside ambassadors' kids at an exclusive central London Spanish-speaking school. Sensing money, the Met investigation grew. The incomeless couple were seen in the company of a Colombian attaché and his wife. Checking back, Maria and Juan Pinzon Arias had paid for the table of 10 at the charity auction. Robin and Roxana had been their guests, but the wealthy couple bid on none of the items themselves. The Arias children were at the same Spanish school as Roxana's. The 4 kids weren't known to be friends, they were in different years, but Maria and Roxana became very close very suddenly. Roxana travelled often with Maria Arias, usually on overnight stays to Barcelona, a known distribution point for cocaine. Smuggling was suspected. On their 3rd trip, the Met investigators compared the airline's weight of Roxana's luggage on the way out, 23 kilos, and on the way back, 33 kilos. The differential was suspiciously precise. Maria Arias was using a diplomatic bag, which could be neither searched nor weighed. The investigation grew again, serious now because of the diplomatic implications. Like Roxana, Juan Pinzon Arias also had money that could not be explained. He bought cars with cash. He bought 3 flats in central London in his mother's name, all in the same block of foreign investment flats. The Met were moving in, swift and hungry for a proceeds of crime bonanza. They'd get to keep a percentage of whatever they found. Every police force needed that sort of money. It looked like 50 or 60 million net, estimated from the iceberg tip they could see above the waterline. Then, abruptly, in the middle of a school term, Robin and Roxana packed up and moved to Glasgow. With no capital, Roxana Fuentesilla bought a viable insurance business for a peppercorn sum. The nominal amount suggested an off-the-books payment. She arrived with £7 million of investment money, transferred from a string of Cayman Island companies. It would take months of document recovery and tracing to prove legally, but the original account was in Maria Arias's name. Police Scotland took over the surveillance and began to covet the Fuentesilla slice of the case. Met investigators speculated that the insurance company was engaged in fraudulent claims, but Morrow couldn't see Fuentesilla going from suspected cocaine smuggling in London to insurance fraud in an unfamiliar city. That was a career criminal move, and she certainly wasn't that. The Met had a theory that Arias and his wife were trying to distance Roxana. Something had gone wrong. That explanation seemed wrong to Morrow as well, but no one wanted her input. Paul Taylor, the brand new chief constable of the brand new Scotland-wide police service, was an ex-Met man. He had taken a personal interest in the case. All developments were to be reported directly to his second-in-command, Deputy Chief Constable Hughes. DCC Hughes channelled the chief's voice as surely as a soundboard, and he had made it very clear to everyone involved that whatever happened, he did not want them to cock up in front of his old comrades. Her chief inspector had taken this to heart. No one would be using their initiative on this, but they might well take the blame. They understood the implication. Police Scotland were the chief constable's stagehands, but not his audience. Among themselves, officers began to refer to the investigation as PINAD. Are you on that PINAD case? Pass that on to the PINAD team. The acronym stood for Prove I'm Not a Dick. A month after Walker and Fuentesilla moved to Glasgow, Morrow's instincts were proved right. The Arias couple weren't trying to distance themselves. Juan Pinzon Arias, short, lumpish, and his wife Maria, tiny and as elegant as a dragonfly, flew into Glasgow International on a private charter plane and spent a night at an exclusive Loch Lomond hotel, 15 miles north of the city. Walker and Fuentesilla drove up to meet them, dressed in full regalia. The local cops kept an eye and reported a meal for 4 in a private dining room. The drinks bill came to almost $3,000. Someone liked their whiskey old and overpriced. Looking at the bill for the meal, Morrow knew she was right. The Colombians weren't sidelining Fuentesilla and Walker. Roxana had been sent here to do a job. The question was, what? Her desk phone rang. She watched it for a moment, thinking swear words in a long, unbroken stream. The Deputy Chief Constable's PA ordered her to come into Pitt Street right now. The deputy head of the entire country's police force was holding a meeting about a missing woman. PINAD. Chapter 6. Tommy stopped the van on the esplanade and pulled on the handbrake. So I'll see you at the Do tomorrow. Ian was staring over the choppy grey estuary to a low peninsula rising out of the water. A brigade of uniformed trees stood to attention, same height and shape, planted at the same time and subject to the same conditions. The Dark Wood, it was called. The foliage was a deep, warm green, a welcoming green. Ian? Bud? You getting out or what? Move. Ian opened the cab door, pushing hard against the wind. He dropped down to the pavement, flat-footed, every part of him heavy and worn. Bud? You all right? Ian slammed the door before Tommy finished his sentence and stood still, his back to the van, until it moved off behind him, following the long shore road to Rue. He felt dead. The breeze salted his lips. He was nothing but a heavy husk standing there, hypnotised by the dark wood across the water, the trees outlined against a brightening sky. It looked clean, soft as a bed. Ian took a step towards the sea. No. That was her thought. He couldn't walk through the water to get to the dark wood. If he was going to die, he should still be careful. He'd draw attention to himself walking off into the sea. He might undo the payment of the debt, and that was the one good thing he had to cling to. Anyway, between the paved esplanade and the water there was a 10-foot drop to a shale beach, and then 50 yards to the water's edge. Somebody would see him. It would cause a fuss and Mark would be angry. He stood anyway, looking at the water, wondering. Maybe she wanted him to walk into the salted sea to clean the blood off. Ian Fraser? He only half heard the woman's voice. Ian Fraser? Is that you? He looked. A tall woman. The wind whipped strands of wild white from her bob, hairs wiggling up like cartoon electricity. She had rich people's skin, soft cheeks and a long, straight nose. He looked her in the eye and saw that she was scared. Was she scared of him? She blinked it away and her face broke into a warm, masking smile. Ian, you're so tall. It's me, Susan Grierson. Don't you remember me? Susan Grierson had been an adventure scout. He didn't want to make her frightened. She was nice. She had tried to get him to join the Scouts, but there was too much going on. She had taken him sailing. Sitting in a boat in Loch Long, Susan Grierson and the other Club Scouts doing all the work. Ian sat in the middle holding the sides, watching the water. It was very early in the morning. Why were they out so early? It was dark still. A chill was radiating from the deep grey. A small boat, low enough to hear the sibilant rustle of the water breaking on the bow. She excused Ian from the work of sailing because something bad had happened, and it was a shame. He couldn't recall what particular thing it was that time. He had watched the wash from the boat, breaking soft and rhythmic. Over and again the water bulged, splitting at its peak, a knife slit in a bag of sand. It rose and split and fell back again and again as they sailed down the soft, grassy coast. Ian had found hope and comfort in the rhythm of that. A swell breaks and another swell arises. Everything passes. It seemed a different image to him today. Something about death. Death was rhythmic, an endless pattern. Every death looked identical as long as you were far enough away. Susan Grierson smiled warmly up at him. The last time they met, she'd been taller than him. Do you remember me? He took a deep breath and tried to speak because it was her and she was nice. I remembered you then in a boat. She gave a small, confused frown, her eyes focusing on a space between his nose and mouth. Sorry? Ian shook his head. No, he shouldn't say that again. It didn't make sense. Ian? Are you all right? Head tilt, concern. But another thing in there. Something else, too. Something glad in there. She liked helping people. Moneyed people often did. Are you all right? It was a big question. Ian looked back at the water, letting the wind sting his eyes. He was twice as tall as he had been when last he saw Susan Grierson. They left. All of the townspeople from then left and came back, some to stay, some to bury, some to brag and gloat, in and out, sea water in the estuary. And like the sea, they looked the same when they came back, but they weren't. Ian wasn't the same when he came back from prison. They all acted as if they were the same, as if nothing had changed, as if they could all trust each other. Susan liked helping. She stayed next to him, pulling her cardigan tight around herself. They stood still for a long time. Beautiful, isn't it? She said, filling the space between them. So, so beautiful. She talked on, stringing bland clichés together into observations. She could just fuck off and leave him alone. He didn't need help. He wanted a cigarette. He hadn't smoked for 6 years. He couldn't remember when he last craved one, but he dearly wanted one now. He'd go and buy tobacco in a minute. He would smoke it out, this thing, this woman. When you take the time to stand and watch the water, Susan was saying, it's mesmerising, isn't it? Like a fire. Her accent was odd. He recalled some information about her from somewhere. Didn't you move to America? Yes. She looked away, down the water. I lived in the States for a long time. Her voice was gentle and calming. Chicago? He didn't think it was Chicago, but he wanted her to speak again. She glanced at him. No, not Chicago. Nassau County, in fact. That near Chicago? He was slurring. It's on Long Island. They stood for a moment, but he missed her caressing voice. On Long Island, he said. In America. Her face twitched and she stepped away very slightly. Ian wasn't offended. His delivery was wrong, he knew that, but he felt quite proud of himself. However strange he seemed on the outside, it was nothing compared to how baffled he was on the inside. Long Island, she spoke carefully, is near Manhattan, near to New York City. Do you know the Hamptons? It seemed like an abrupt change of topic. Do they live here? Now they were both confused. Ian sensed that it wasn't just him. The conversation had become bewildering. Their voices overlapped. I want baccy, he said, and Susan said, come to my house. She looked very keen. Ian ran back through what had been said so far. Was it a build-up to that? He didn't think so. Susan was looking at him, desperation shining out of her. She really wanted him to come to her house. Was she religious? But then her smile widened and warmed. Did she want to have sex with him? Ian found that slightly frightening. The scariness didn't make it entirely uninviting, though. It kind of added to it. She wasn't a stranger, but like a teacher from when he was young. Maybe he'd imagined her naked back then and owed it to his old self. But maybe not. Maybe not safe. His head was already messed after this morning. Ugh, I don't... Come on. She waved an arm uphill. I'm not far at all. Just up there on Sutherland Crescent. Ian had never been in a Sutherland Crescent house. They were the originals where the town plan began, the earliest of the Helensburgh houses. Plain, but something to see. He'd been hearing about them all his life. No, he should be careful. Something shifted inside him. Something behind his ribs, precursor to a stitch. If he was indoors, alone with a woman, he thought maybe something bad would happen. I was just going to buy tobacco. He thumbed up the seafront, resisting. She held his eye and stepped towards him. There's a newsagent's on the way. We can get whatever you want. Somehow, then, they were crossing from the esplanade together, heading to the far pavement, the town shore. They kept quite far away from each other in the empty road, and she was smiling. Ian didn't know why she was smiling. Maybe she thought Ian and Tommy were going to let her go, or she was thinking about suntans and beaches, and maybe she would make it to the trees. No. He shook his head at the tarmac. No, that wasn't Susan Grierson. But Susan was as passive as a heifer too. He was worried for her, worried that she trusted him.
End of CD 1. CD 2.
Turning into a quiet street, the wind dropped suddenly, and they could hear each other walking, breathing, the scuff of their clothes. It was intimate without a chaperoning wind. She moved close to him, falling in step. Ian felt he could have held her hand, exchanging warmth skin to skin, and it would be all right. There was something in her, a familiar sadness, maybe a bond. She was a bit lost too. They walked on until she stopped at a shop window. Handwritten adverts behind the glass. Dogs needing homes, events, Zumba classes, buy stamps here. Ian read, looking for answers to questions he couldn't quite formulate. She was staring at him. He searched her face for clues. Finally, she nodded at the shop. Cigarettes? He remembered then. He pushed the door open, setting off a loud beep, and stepped in. He'd never been in here before. It was half empty. A shelf by the door held 3 long life loaves. The tea bags came in small packets. The bags of sugar were mini. It was a place for forgetful shoppers, old ladies, people with no car to get to out-of-town superstores. Behind the counter, a shopkeeper was absent-mindedly arranging jars of penny sweeties as he chatted foreign words into the mobile clamped between his shoulder and his ear. He raised his eyebrows in hello, letting Ian know he could still serve, even though he was talking on the phone. Ian walked to the back of the shop. He needed a moment. He hadn't felt this numb in a long time. Had he just pulled? She was handsome. Nice women had often wanted to save him, and she was not a mental junkie. She didn't even seem to have wains because she made and held eye contact. The eyes of mothers flitted over your shoulder all the time. They were always watching out. Had he just pulled? Ian looked into an open chill cabinet, blue light flickering over milk, and caught his reflection on the steel back. He looked like a sad fisherman. Broad shoulders, thick blonde hair, but dirty. His tracky top was smeared brown at the cuffs and down the front. Susan Grierson wouldn't pull a man this dirty, but then she'd been in America for a long time. People change. Some women were attracted to mental guys. Sheila was. If he had sex with Susan Grierson, would she expect him to be rough? Ian didn't like that sort of thing. He walked over to the counter, nodding at the tobacco packets behind the shopkeeper. Golden Virginia, and green papers, and gie us one of your lighters as well. The shopkeeper picked up some yellow plastic lighters and showed them to Ian. Clear yellow, neon yellow, sandy yellow. 3 for a quid? Ian didn't need 3, but it seemed like less effort to say yes. Aye. 3 yellow lighters. Other coloured lighters in the box, green and blue, red ones, purple ones, but the guy chose all yellow for him. 9 quid. Ian looked at the tobacco pouch glinting in a cellophane envelope. Last time he smoked was with her in Glasgow, a thin woman. The man smiled and said, You haven't smoked for a while, pal. Dear now, innit? But Ian was with the thin woman a long time ago, in Glasgow, who asked him to hold her throat and pretend to strangle her while they were having sex. Ian was scared of her and what she might make him do. Her hair smelled stale. She had a stain on her blouse, green, washed in, like she'd vomited bile and washed it and it hadn't come out. He tried to get away from her, but she followed him to the pub. You look like a movie star. Pal? 9 quid? Ian was staring at the counter, thinking about a bloody curlicue vessel snaking across the white of her eye. The memory brought a bubble of sadness up from deep in his gut. why did she go with them to the boat? If she'd screamed in the house, someone might have called the cops and stopped it. But then the debt wouldn't be paid, so he didn't know what to hope for. Buddy? The shopkeeper had seen his confusion and reached out tenderly. You okay? Ian was ashamed. He slapped a hand over his eyes, rubbing hard. He put a tenner down on the counter and picked up the things, tucking them into different pockets, the pouch and papers and yellow lighters. Holding the change so tight that the coins dug into his palm, Ian reached for the door. Susan Grierson was still there, waiting on the pavement, hopeful as a wayward teenager outside an off-sales. She watched his face as he came out and sighed. Gosh, Ian, she said, you looked so much like your mother just then. He stepped heavily down into the street. He wasn't getting his whole offer then. His mistake. He was half relieved. Too much had happened today already. His chest tightened. They walked up the road, she a half step ahead, leading him. So Sheila died? She was nodding. Mum told me. Sheila. Sheila. Today was a wall of Sheila. While ago, aye, he said. 8, maybe 9 years ago. Gosh. She let off a huff of dismay, politeness. I'm so sorry. It was a brain hemorrhage, of course. It was a danger she lived with every day. Susan was talking in a sort of churchy voice, like she was reading at Sheila's funeral or something. She was astonishingly brave, leading an independent life with that degree of brain damage. I think the doctors were amazed she could even walk. Ian stopped walking. Brain damage? The words clattered around his mind. Sheila had brain damage. Susan Grierson was looking at him as if everyone in the world knew. Ian didn't know. It was obvious now he thought about it. Sheila had a home help and a social worker to manage her money for her. He always thought she got support because he was so much trouble. He thought her respite weekends were giving her a break from him. He looked at Susan. Sheila had brain damage? She nodded. She seemed to understand that he didn't know. Didn't they tell you? Did they? Her reluctance to talk and angry for no reason moods. No one ever told him. Did they tell him? He might have been told in a couched way, in a kind way, and misunderstood. Miss Grierson talked on about Sheila at school, and what a good sailor she was, and the dances they went to, in all the great houses when they were girls. They were walking along by a tall hedge when she arrived at Sheila having Ian. Young when she had you. I never had children. She gave him a glancing blow of a look, a demand for pity. It wasn't a pity. She wouldn't have thought it was if she had stayed and knew what Ian had put Sheila through. The shame and the worry, prison visits and court dates, little hiya waves to her from the dock. He looked at Susan, saw the self-pity in her eyes and found her disgusting. He felt a scaly tail flick inside his chest wall. Look. He stopped suddenly. She'd overshot him, had to turn back to listen. Susan, I'm just going home. Please, no. Her hand flew out, reaching for his forearm. The plea was too intense. She held his eye. I can't go home alone. How? Is there somebody in the house? I don't know. She looked around the pavement, blinking hard. Not a boyfriend who wanted to hit her. She would have told him if it was that. What wouldn't she tell him? The figure of her mother? A voice in her head? She couldn't say, but she was begging him not to leave her. Her need was craven. He knew that feeling. He didn't have the strength to leave her now. Stepping towards her, he draped his arm over her shoulders, telling her that she wouldn't have to beg again, that he understood. She melted towards him for a moment, grateful, and then drew away. "It's okay," he said softly, as if she was Sheila. "It's all right. I'm coming with you." Susan Grierson smiled at the pavement, nodded them uphill, and they walked on together towards her house. Chapter 7. Morrow sat with her back against the wall, calm observer in a blizzard of clammy panic. 3 of the most highly paid, powerful men in Police Scotland had been called in. Heavy personnel. As if to justify their places, each took turns monologuing about mistakes others should avoid, things they should be afraid of. A day's wage from each of them would have paid to keep one of the rural stations they were shutting open for a week. The power differential between Morrow and the rest of the room was so steep she felt she could be sitting in her pants and no one would notice. Most DIs would give half their pensions to be here. Morrow was astute enough to know that she barely was. She kept her own counsel as she watched Deputy Chief Constable Hughes ask questions of Nolly Dent, her Chief Inspector. Nolly had a silly name but was a good guy, handsome, small and smart. She saw Hughes half listening to Nolly's answers, half imagining his Chief Constable's reaction. She watched him conduct the meeting calmly, lay out his jurisdictional argument for Police Scotland getting a slice of the 7 million when it was found. It was a Scottish case. The investigation predated the move here, but the takeover of the firm was a cut-off, a fresh start for criminal action. It wasn't his argument. It was the Chief Constable's, and it was really smart. She'd thought of him as vain and petty because of Pinad, but her conviction wavered now. When her turn came to speak, Morrow insisted that they should not be blinded by the proceeds money, but follow normal protocol in the circumstances. By far the most likely explanation was that Fuentesilla had been killed by her partner during a domestic argument. However, they could use this as an opportunity to access the firm's files and find out more about what was going on. Fuentesilla was argumentative, she told them. She argued with everyone. It was unlikely that her domestic setup was peaceful. Plus, the caller seemed to be her kid. If she had run away, she would have taken the children with her. Chief Superintendent Saunders smirked at her. "Don't you think you're being a bit soft on her? What is this, the Mothers' Union?" Morrow wished she had a Victoria sponge cake with her. She didn't speak, but her face was saying something very eloquent. DCC Hughes moved the meeting on. The perils of Roxana Fuentesilla were obliterated by stats and jurisdictional issues, by suggested strategies for questioning hostile witnesses and legal issues over the proceeds. Morrow would never have noticed, normally. Their job was to police the city, not to save the damsel, but she was listening like a member of the victim's family. The more she thought about it, the more she knew that it was all about her brother. Roxana was Danny without the shame and resentment. Her defences were down because Danny and Roxana were so unalike. Roxana was female, Spanish, wealthy, but she had Danny's audacity, his same shameless sense of entitlement. Secretly, Morrow realised she admired that. The pointless meeting burbled on. Even the DCC seemed to think the monologues were too long. He got up to leave before the meeting was concluded, nodding at his PA to shepherd them through that last boring bit. He didn't need to stay because the course of action had been decided. Morrow and a hand-picked DC would attend the missing woman's domicile, posing as everyday cops on a missing persons call. They would follow normal procedure, voice record everything for transcript. They would insist on access to the insurance firm's offices on the pretext of hidden debts. They would get all the info on the firm that they could. 3 of the most highly paid men in Police Scotland had gathered together to arrive at this complex strategic decision. Go and see. The energy went out of the meeting after Hughes left. The final statement was rounded up as everyone packed away their papers. The meeting ended in jig time. Out on the landing, waiting for the lift down, Morrow stood with C.S. Saunders. He was a fat man, an important man, but she didn't really know him. He knew he had offended her and was sorry. He stood next to her, catching her eye, nodding, smiling, seemed to want her to say something. Morrow would have said whatever he wanted her to say, but she couldn't guess what it was. She smiled back. She nodded back. She was on the brink of giving a thumbs up when he said, "It's been chaos out there since your brother went away." Morrow dropped her smile. The lift arrived and they got in. The door shut behind them. "Yep, he kept it all quiet," C.S. Saunders told her, "is what I'm saying while he was running things. These people." He smiled at her, saw it was going down badly, and awkwardly turned his bared teeth to the door. Morrow felt herself go very stiff, as if a spider too big to swat was running across her back. Accommodation. No one in the force ever vocalised it, but they all knew that the black economy was essential. Men like Danny were responsible for 20% of global GDP. If justice was done and they were all imprisoned, the world economy would collapse. Civilizations would fall. "Yes, sir," she said, hoping that sounding agreeable might be an end to it. "Yes, indeed." He took that as encouragement. "They're tearing each other to bits over territories now. Little more than a few streets, most of them. The stab stats for last quarter read as if a civil war has broken out." The lift alighted and the doors opened. She should have let him go first, out of respect, but she slipped past him. "Been quiet for years because of your brother?" he called after her. "He's my half-brother," said Morrow quietly. "Just my half-brother, sir." She walked away without being dismissed. An underling's revenge. McGrain was waiting for her in the lobby. They walked to the car park in silence. McGrain was wary of her mood. As they got into the car, he asked what the chief was really like. He was guessing she'd been shouted at. Morrow said the chief was professional and climbed into the passenger seat. McGrain got in and started the car. Danny was carrying on his business vicariously from prison. Not much had changed for him, but he'd stopped power broking between factions in the city. It meant chaos on the streets. Keeping the peace was in his interest as much as anyone else's, but Danny wouldn't do it anymore, just to show them what they had brought on themselves. People were dying because Danny McGrath was in a huff. Chapter 8. Ian and Susan stepped carefully on the overgrown path to the pale green front door. The garden was wild and smelled mulchy. The house itself looked well preserved. It was a miniature villa with windows on either side. Little pillars and an open porch over shallow steps. Susan stepped up to the door. She turned the key in the lock, but waited until Ian was flanking her before she pushed it open. The heavy old doors swung into a wide hall, carpeted and papered in faded blue and yellow. Light filtered in from the far kitchen at the end of the corridor. It looked misty, but Ian realised that it was a fog of dust, stirred up by the suck of the front door opening. Susan was looking around as if she'd never been there before. She stepped in and waved Ian over the threshold, shut the front door quietly and tiptoed through an open door on the left into what seemed to be a dining room. The house was incredibly fusty. A dresser just inside the door had a thick layer of dust on it, so thick it looked sticky, as if time had compressed it. Ian followed her in. A dirty whiskey glass was sitting on the varnished dining room table in a clear smear in the dust coating. It must have been Susan's, from earlier, because she didn't look at it twice. Ian noticed she was tiptoeing. "Is there someone in here, Susan?" She ignored him, checked the hall again, and then turned to whisper to him, "I need to see Mark Barrett." Ian looked at her mouth. Mark Barrett? How could she know about Mark Barrett? "Mark's in Barcelona." "Will you call him?" "Can't." She clearly didn't know Mark. He never took calls when he was away. Everyone who knew him knew that. Left the mobile at home when he was in Barcelona. Sometimes when he came back, he had to go away again almost immediately. Ian suddenly wondered if Susan was a cop. She looked like a cop. She was fit and slim, but she was emotional, and she was bringing him home, which was not cop. "Why do you want to see Mark?" "Do you know who would have his number?" She began walking down the corridor to the kitchen, careful scanning for someone as she went. Ian followed. He was about to ask if she had been broken into, what was going on, but he was startled by the state of the kitchen. The kitchen was massive and almost derelict. Big windows to the garden were netted with ragged cobwebs. Part of the ceiling had fallen in and lay crumbled on the worktop. At the far end of the room, an archway opened onto a filthy, windowed conservatory, filling the room with reproachful sunlight. She went into a pantry cupboard, checking it out. "Have you been living here, Susan?" "No, just got back a day or so ago. My mum died." Ian thought old Mrs. Grierson had died 2 years ago. He thought he'd heard about it on a day release. The house was messy enough to have been left for years, but Susan had just come back now. She stepped back into the kitchen, saw him again, and seemed relieved. "Tea," she announced, her mood abruptly lighter. Looking through cupboards, she found an electric kettle under the sink and took it out. She blew the dust off. Ian was not a fastidious man, but he didn't think he'd be drinking anything out of that. She filled it with water from rattly pipes and plugged it in, watching with surprise as it went on. "I'll go and find some cups," she said, and left the room. Ian couldn't fathom what was going on. He wanted to smoke. That was all he wanted, and then he'd leave. He dropped down into an armchair and a puff of dust rose around him. The chair was in the mouth of the archway to the conservatory, draughty because a hole had been dug in the conservatory floor under the outside wall, but at least it was blowing the dust away from him. He took out a cigarette paper, opened the tobacco pouch and teased out a pinch. Engulfed by the scent of chocolate, he laid it along the paper valley. It was harder to do than he remembered, his fingertips clumsy, but the smell and sounds, the cleanness of it filled his eye, batting away memories of his midnight qualms and the bloody dock and sailing with Susan. His mouth watered with anticipation as he licked the gum. Even though it had been a long time since he smoked, he remembered everything about the ritual of this. He remembered, too, all that it used to mean to him. A mood change, a cogent plan, a reward or compensation. Now he wasn't hoping for any of those things. He just wanted to flood his lungs and smother her breath in him. Sitting the cigarette between his lips, he felt in his pocket and took out a sand-yellow lighter. He lit it, heard the crackle of the paper, tasted the warm toxins flood his mouth. He inhaled. A sharp, pebbled wave scratched down his throat. The tide of nicotine coursed across his inward ocean. Up it foamed, on, up estuaries and rivers, burns and rivulets, until every inland shore and bank was tainted and trilling. The smoke kick-started his heart in an irregular bossa nova rhythm. It throbbed in his throat, as if the fat fist of an organ had shifted to make room for the squatter in his chest. He felt her ebb. It was working. He tried to hold the breath, but his diaphragm convulsed, expelled the smoke in wild, wet, spluttered coughs. "Here we go," sing-songed Susan as she came back and sat a tray of tea things on a dusty side table. She pulled a kitchen chair over and sat down next to him. Side by side, Ian and Susan looked out into the conservatory, light filtering through dirty green glass. It wasn't a modern conservatory full of sofas or anything, but an old greenhouse attached to the back of the house. A crack on one of the panels was mended with time-yellowed masking tape. Empty glass shelves lined the walls. A seedlings table, the wood bleached grey with light exposure, had been shoved to the side of the room, making way for the hole dug next to the ventilation grate. "Shall I pour?" Susan Grierson smiled fondly at him. The tea things were tacky with dirt. "OK," he said, because she was holding the teapot and waiting for an answer. Ian wondered if she could see the dirt. He hadn't heard the kettle boil. He wanted to ask her what was going on, but she didn't seem much more together than he was. It was a mistake, coming here. They weren't going to help each other. He'd leave in a minute. She poured 2 small, prissy cups of weak tea and added a sprinkle of powdered milk. Ian said he took 3 sugars, and she put them in a well, stirred with a little spoon and handed him a cup and saucer. He took it and put it on the arm of his chair. "What happened in there, then?" He pointed to the freshly dug dirt floor on the conservatory. "Lead pipes," she said, "had to be replaced. They replaced all the piping in the house years ago, but that offshoot serviced the garden and the conservatory. Worrying, actually, because Mother was growing her own tomatoes and lettuce and watering them with leaded water." "Worrying, actually," he echoed, glad they were talking normally. "Lead poisoning is cumulative. I mean, she didn't die of lead poisoning, she had a heart attack, but it's terribly bad for you." The shape of the hole, long and deep and tucked away in a corner, it made him think of bad things. The pipes were right deep down there. She touched her hair and looked harried. "There's so much to do in this house. A lot of it fundamental. Dusty. It is dusty. There are damp spots in all the bathrooms, leaky pipes, and the decoration. Dreadful. So old-fashioned. Oh, biscuits." She leapt up and went back to the counter again. Ian heard her moving about behind him. He was hoping she wouldn't bring a dead rat over and say it was biscuits. She was a bit Baby Jane. But suddenly something sharp stabbed him in the back from the inside. She was feeling for a way out. He took another tremulous draw on his cigarette. The pain cowered deep. He held his breath, held it, his eyes shut, concentrating. He held fast, though his lungs were begging and his eyes throbbed. He felt her wither. He felt her gone. Ian let his breath out and found he couldn't stop. He began to cry. He hadn't cried properly for a long time. His tear ducts yawned, aching, as salt water dropped from his cheeks down the front of his top. Jaffa cakes? Eyes flicked open. Susan was holding a blue freezer bag inches from his nose. It had Jaffa biscuits in it, most of them broken. Ian slapped it away just as she let go and the bag slithered into his lap. He picked it up and shoved it at her. "Get the fuck!" But Susan didn't mean any harm, he reminded himself, and she was in a state too. "Look, no thanks, okay? I don't like biscuits." The blurred bag retreated. She walked away. Ian wilted forwards over his lap, his hands in his hair. He heard the cigarette singe, smelled the sulphurous tang of burning. Upset? She was saying something. He wasn't sure what she was saying, but she was saying something new. Now she'd stopped talking. She was sitting. A warm palm came out and drew a circle on his back. The paralysing sadness was lifting. He wiped the wet from his face, pinched drips off his nose. He dried his hand on his trouser leg. The cigarette had burned out. Another cigarette, maybe? "More tea? Oh, you haven't drunk that one yet." Ian glanced over. Her hands were folded in her lap. She smiled politely, determined to keep to the script of tea, whatever he did. It was annoying how fucking insistent she was about the tea and biscuits in a fucking saucer. For all she knew, his best friend might have died. He might not be crying because he was guilty of a terrible thing. She didn't know. He was angry at her, and he looked at the hole in the conservatory floor again. Susan was smiling. An awkward moment at a minister's tea party. They looked out into the smoke swirling in the empty conservatory. "Why did you ask me to come here? How'd you know Mark?" "Well, Ian," she spoke confidingly, "frankly, I wanted to ask a small favour. I don't know anyone here, but I'd like a pinch, and I heard Mark Barrett is the person to see about that." "You want a what?" "A deal. Of white. Coke. Charlie. Prince. I want to buy. Can you help me?" Chapter 9. Robin Walker was furious when he opened the front door. He chewed his cheek as Morrow and McGrain showed their ID. They spoke to him on the phone, half an hour ago, about the call this morning. They asked to come in to talk about his missing partner, Roxana Fuentesilla. "Yes, come in." He karate-chopped a hand at the hall carpet, ordering them to move, snorting with annoyance as Morrow and McGrain sidled into a narrow hallway. Policing meant spending a lot of time with angry people, not all of them members of the public. Morrow knew anger well, its moods and its nuances. She found that anger was usually just fear with its makeup on, so her question was this. Was Robin Walker frightened because his partner was missing? Or was he frightened because someone had called the police? "You said it was an anonymous call?" He was tall and lean and loomed over them, avoiding eye contact, giving sharp, rhythmic, pissed-off little nods. "Yes," said Morrow, taking in his thick dark hair and pale blue eyes. Smeary footage from distant cameras didn't do him justice. Yes, is Miss Fuentesilla missing? Walker caught his breath, dropped his chin to his chest and looked back up. When he spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. Yes, she is missing. And you are? Robin Walker. I'm a partner. Boyfriend. Can we go through? Talk to you there. He waved an impatient hand at the living room door and stormed off through it. Morrow let Migraine go ahead of her, glancing down the narrow corridor to a rack of coats and saw a green parka with a fur-trimmed hood. Heading into the living room, Morrow's eye was drawn to the carpet. It was new and white. She glanced at the skirting board, checking for carpet worms, telltale strands of wool that worked their way out as a carpet settled. She couldn't see any and found that reassuring. Robin hadn't beaten Roxana to death and replaced the carpet. Probably. Compared to the narrow hall, the living room was dazzlingly grand. A chandelier the size of a shopping trolley hung from the ceiling. 2 enormous floor-length windows framed heavy bowed trees nodding gently in the street. Robin and Roxana's furniture was designed for a small London flat, and the couch and coffee table, the dining table and chairs were dwarfed to doll size in the high Victorian room. It looked as if the family were squatting in the lower third of a fish tank. Morrow was so distracted by the clash of scale that she didn't notice the children at first. They were on the couch, watching her come in, sitting completely still. Martina and Hector Vicente. Their ankles were crossed, hands folded in laps, backs poker straight, one a mirror to the other. They looked at Morrow and Migraine with the composed disinterest of Gainsborough portraits. Blonde like their mother, long-limbed and lush-lipped. Neither had a flicker in their expression. She looked at Hector and wanted to smile, remembering him with his mum in the bakery, but he dropped his gaze to the floor and she remembered herself. He was wearing the grey, skinny-leg jeans. She told them her name, that she was here about their mother, and stood near them. She wanted them to speak. She had a voice recorder running in her pocket so that the bosses and the bosses' bosses could read every word once it was transcribed. The audio would be useful too, though. They could compare their voices to the call file. Don't you have school today? Our mother is missing, said Martina. We thought it would be best if we remained at home. I see. She wanted a sample of Hector's voice too. She nodded at him. Don't you have school, son? I do also, but my sister... He gestured to Martina very formally. It was clear he was talking in his second language. Thought it would be best if I stayed home today. Morrow nodded. I see. Thank you. He was still on the child side of 12, his voice high. The caller could have been either one of them, but Martina's jeans were blue. Morrow felt she had to respond to the strained situation. Sorry, Robin, were you having a chat in here before we arrived? Walker glowered at the children. Hector opened his mouth, but his eyes flickered to Martina, and she gave him a stare that told him to shut up. No one spoke. It had taken 20 seconds to reach deadlock. OK. Migraine clapped his hands with synthetic cheer, making everyone jump. Here's a plan. How about you kids go and have a kickabout next door and let us chat to your dad for a minute? Everyone panicked in the silence. Then Hector spoke. Robin's not a... Shut up, Hector! Martina stood up, her eyes firmly on Migraine. That man said for us to go. She stood, gestured for Hector to get up and led him out. They moved like despondent dancers making the long walk off stage after a bad performance. Walker scowled and followed them, slamming the door and came back, sitting in their place. Were Were you talking to the kids before we arrived, Mr. Walker? Yes. After you called, I asked them and they told me Hector phoned you. About their mum? McGrain smiled gently. You don't seem very pleased about that. Suddenly animated, Walker looked up. I'm fucking furious. Why did they think they had to go behind my back? I've been up all night, worried sick. Just tell me, that's what I'm angry about. He raised his voice reproachfully at the door, continuing the interrupted argument. That's what I mean. I'm not an ogre. His eyes reddened suddenly, but not with the slow grind of worry, not with sadness. Something more intense than fear. It looked like panic. He wasn't behaving like someone who'd murdered his girlfriend the day before and then let the police into his house. He wasn't trying to act innocent at all. Morrow looked away, giving him a private moment. She found herself staring straight at the 64,000 quid display cabinet. It looked smaller than it did in the photographs, but just as ugly. That's a one-off. A Larkin and Sons. Walker took a deep breath. A design icon, actually. Handcrafted. Nice, said McGrain politely. Morrow nodded and hummed as if she agreed. What is a design icon? I've never really understood that. Walker struggled to explain. It was a special design. Sort of a very good one. One that other people copied, he thought. He attempted a charming smile. The mouth managed it, but his eyes stayed sad and angry. Walker was out of his depth. He was young. Being so handsome wasn't making him less sympathetic. Morrow remembered who she was pretending to be. She opened her briefcase, took out the missing person form and a pen. So, Mr. Walker, let's see if we can find her. Put an end to your worry. When did you last see Roxana? Robin Walker looked into the near distance, clutched his hands together, and told them that Roxana had left for work yesterday morning, dropping the kids off at school. He hadn't seen or heard from her since. It was very out of character. McGrain nodded encouragingly as Morrow wrote. You've just moved here? She asked. From London. 2 months ago. And how are you enjoying Glasgow? Great, he said, but a twitch in his jaw suggested otherwise. Morrow tried not to smile. Glasgow was strong cheese, not to everyone's taste. How did Roxana seem yesterday morning? Fine, normal. She took the kids to school at the normal time, but then didn't go into work, didn't call anyone, had not been back to the house. None of her clothes were missing, and her passport was still here. He'd found it in a drawer in the bedroom. She asked him, had they argued? Most couples argue sometimes. He smiled. We argue all the time. But no, nothing special. Do your arguments ever become physical? She hit me with a pizza once. He hurried to correct himself, but it was funny. She was trying to be funny because we got sort of, stuck, fighting about something. He refreshed his smile, wrung his hands. McGrain echoed the smile. Walker was giving a very bad account of himself. If Morrow had no previous knowledge, he would be suspicious. The pizza story rang true. If Walker had killed his girlfriend, he would be trying to misdirect them. He'd say they didn't fight, theorise that she had run away. He would have hidden her passport. Why didn't you call us? He looked her straight in the eye and, unblinking, said he didn't know. He just didn't know. That part wasn't true. He did know. He hadn't called because they were doing something illegal. Morrow noted his tell, the long, unblinking stare. He had the grace to wring his hands as he lied. She began to work her way through the set questions on the missing persons form. Did he have a recent photograph of her? Walker stepped over to the mantelpiece and lifted a silver-framed photo of Roxana. He handed it to Morrow. Roxana, head and shoulders, grinning lovingly into the camera lens, a soft spring light behind her. She was gorgeous. High cheekbones, olive skin, scarlet lips. Her thick blonde hair was pulled up loosely, pinned with a feathered fascinator. "Is this your wedding?" "No, we're not married. We were just at a wedding." "We might do better with a more workaday one." As she handed it back, Walker's eye fell on the image, and yearning, unbidden, overwhelmed him. He turned away and laid the picture face down on the mantel. "I'll get you another one." He left the room. They heard him walk down the hall and then return, hesitating behind the living room door. He came in holding an original iPad, round-edged and lumpy. He sat down next to Morrow, turning it on and opening the iPhoto file. McGrain craned to see it. A checkerboard of pictures, most of Roxana alone, but some with her children, all from the past year. It must have been Walker's iPad because they were nearly all of her. Roxana on a white beach. Roxana in a dark London street. And in all of them, Roxana craning into Walker's gaze, radiating love. In the manner of digital photography, the same view had been captured several times, less an attempt at bettering the image than an articulation of the photographer's enthusiasm for the moment. One or two were of the couple together. Robin and Roxana standing together in a park, stiff-smiling for whichever kindly stranger took the snap. Some were of Robin and Roxana with either Martina or Hector, the other child presumably behind the lens. In the group photos, where Martina was the photographer, Robin's head was invariably cut off by the top of the frame. She had some of her mother's pugnaciousness. Morrow scrolled down to the more recent ones, taken since they'd arrived in Glasgow. Roxana in the orchid house at the Botanical Gardens. She was standing in the foreground, the light dusky and yellow. Behind her, at opposite ends of a long bench, were Martina and a man Morrow knew as Mr. Y. Mr. Y was an unidentified but recurrent character in the CCTV of the Glasgow pin ad investigation. He was one of the first people Roxana made contact with when she'd arrived. He'd been seen going into the office, the house, sitting in cars, always with Roxana. He was slim, around 60, dressed carefully and had a neatly trimmed moustache. They'd been trying to put a name to him for weeks. In the photo, Martina sat as far away from everyone as she could, hard up against the arm of the bench. Morrow asked Robin to print that picture. He took the iPad from her, tapped the screen a couple of times, and a printer snapped awake out in the hall. Morrow referred back to her list of missing persons questions. Friends and relatives? He told her, only being somewhat cagey. Roxana's parents were from Madrid but had died some time ago. She had a sister who lived in Boston. They called each other once a week. They were close. Morrow had listened to the Met's recordings of the stilted calls. The sister was a snide bitch and Roxana was warm. Close was overplaying it, but that didn't make it a lie. Most families were held together with myths. He said Roxana hadn't made any friends in Glasgow yet, but she hadn't been in touch with friends in London since she disappeared. He'd called everyone the night before. Morrow asked the next question on the form. Did Roxana have any medical conditions they should know about? No, she was healthy. She had a heart murmur, but it was being monitored and she exercised around it. It was a stable underlying condition, he said, using an insurance form phrase. She was thinking about the recorder in her pocket, really, imagining herself heard by her bosses, So she read out the next question without thinking. Could they have a DNA sample for Roxana? Walker froze. If Morrow had been a real missing persons cop, she would have been aware of the emotional impact of the question. She would have tiptoed into it, dropped the tone of her voice or something. She backpedaled, only so that they could rule out anyone who happened to be found, not because they had any reason to think anything, you know. Walker's voice was husky. Where would he even get a DNA sample? McGrain suggested a hairbrush. Walker stood up slowly and left the room. He came back, his eyes smarting, holding a heated hairbrush reverently in 2 hands. Morrow took it and thanked him. It was completely useless. Heat killed DNA, but she hadn't the heart to say that to him. If necessary, she could ask for something else later. She bagged the pointless item and slipped it into her briefcase, asking as she did so for Roxana's bank account details and her mobile number, his mobile number, and the kids' numbers too if they had mobiles. He balked. What do you need her bank account number for? To see if she's taken any money out. That'll tell us where she is and if she's safe. We need her mobile number too. He chewed his lip, thinking, and then flashed a cagey smile. Honestly, Rox hasn't called me. McGrain explained that it wouldn't just help them check her calls. If the phone was turned on, they could track her movements from it. It would really help. Walker agreed to give them all of the information, but seemed to change his mind when Morrow handed him the form. There was a great deal of fumbling with a pen and overly elaborate writing out of names. He was reluctant, but in the end he gave them everyone's numbers. His, Roxana's, the kids'. It made Morrow think he was concerned enough about her to give them information he thought potentially damning. She asked if Roxana had ever gone missing before, and Walker looked shifty. Not that I'm aware of. We've only been together for a year and a bit. She may have. You'd have to ask the kids. The kids aren't your kids? No, their father lives in Ecuador. Do you know his name? Miguel Vicente. He spelled it for her and watched her write it down. She asked for Vicente's address and was told that he had 2, one in Quito and a beachfront house in Guayaquil, both in Ecuador. Would Roxana have contacted him? Walker snorted at that. Not bloody likely. Why not bloody likely? The story came out in a messy jumble. Her ex, he was a total bastard, sort of, you see. Left without telling her where he was going and married someone else a week later. Morrow knew it was a month. And he wanted the kids now, but only because his wife was infertile. She had 2 kids. But he'd never bothered about the kids before. He had. Morrow could hear Roxana's voice in the bitter rant. She'd heard divorce talk before. Vicente didn't pay a penny in maintenance either. True. Rox had seen a lawyer, but it made no difference. Of course, said Morrow, trying to impress the voice recorder audience with the breadth of her knowledge. Ecuador doesn't have a reciprocal maintenance agreement. We see this a lot in missing persons. It's not uncommon for children to be taken abroad by an ex. She imagined the DCC Hughes reading that, surprised and impressed by her erudition. Walker looked puzzled. No, the kids aren't gone. She's gone. He was right. RMAs were irrelevant. Hughes would read that too. Morrow's smugness curdled to mild embarrassment. She was addressing the wrong audience. Are the kids in touch with their dad? They weren't, as far as he knew. Rox got upset at the mention of her ex, he said, and gave a little cringe. Morrow felt that maybe it was Robin who got upset at the mention of her ex. It was the downside of utterly condemning an ex to a new partner. It left no room for mitigation when the bitterness receded. She asked him about the business. "Injury climbs for you," he said. The tacky posters were everywhere, on the underground, on bus stops, jarring red on yellow. The eye of injury was represented by a silhouette of a ladder with a tiny red man falling off it. "Those posters aren't hers. The owner was retiring. He was building up the goodwill. I don't really know anything about her business." Morrow said casually that they would have a look at the books to check for debts undisclosed at the time of sale, railroading him by segueing straight into, "If you could go and find contact details for the children's father while we speak to them." She stood up, and Migraine did too. Robin got up and blocked her way. "This isn't about custody." He said it very carefully. "As I said, the kids are still here." "I didn't say it was about custody, Mr. Walker. She may have tried to contact Mr. Vicente." "No, she hasn't. It's not that." They looked at each other. Morrow soft, Walker frightened. "Is there something you want to tell me, Mr. Walker?" "No." "Are you sure? Because I feel like you're worried about something but not being completely open with me." "No." "OK." She nodded Migraine to the door. "We'll speak to the children." Through the dark hallway and down the back corridor, they stopped at a printer on a table, and Robin handed her a B5-sized print of the Botanics picture. It was still damp. They came to 2 bedroom doors facing each other. Martina and Hector were at their respective desks in their respective rooms, both playing dull platform games on their laptops with the sound turned off. They had been listening, but now affected surprise that there was anyone there. Martina stood up. "May I help you?" Robin stepped between them. "They want you to tell them about Mummy." Martina spat viciously at Walker. "What about her?" He took a threatening step into the room, pointing at the girl as if he'd like to slap her. "Has she phoned you?" Martina pointed back at him and shouted, "Would we have called the police if she'd phoned us?" "Since you called the police, has she phoned you since then?" Evidently it was a high-volume household. Morrow raised her voice. "I'll talk to the kids alone, please, Mr. Walker." "Marty! Has she?" "Alone, Mr. Walker." Malevolent joy rippled across Martina's face as Walker backed away. Hector was watching from his bedroom door, still as a hunted rabbit. Morrow decided to start with Hector. Gesturing for Migraine to follow, she walked into the boys' room. Martina followed them. "Go back to your own room." Martina tried to catch her brother's eye. Morrow stepped in and blocked her view. "We'll come and see you in a minute." She pulled the door over, not closing it, knowing Martina would listen. They heard the girl step away and shut her own door, but felt her vigilance radiating across the corridor. Hector sat down on the side of his bed, holding his stomach as if it ached, rocking softly back and forth. "OK, son, we're just going to ask a few questions." "In the car," he hissed in a whisper, watching the door. "They had a big fight, going to school, yesterday." "Yesterday morning?" He kept his eyes on the door. "Yesterday. Mummy went crazy because Daddy phoned Martina." "Doesn't he phone normally?" "Sometimes. She was furious, though." "Why?" "Something he said about Auntie Maria. It made Mummy really furious." "Who is Auntie Maria?" "Maria Arias, Mummy's friend in London." "What was it?" "I don't know. I thought maybe Daddy had a lot of affairs. Mummy and Daddy don't get on." Hector shrugged. I don't know. Marty said it was bullshit. Hector, Moro whispered. Did you report her missing this morning? Did you call us? He nodded. Marty waited in the taxi. She said there would be cameras and two of us was, obvious. Why didn't you just call from here? He looked at the door. Is it because of Robin? He frowned at his bed. Do you think Robin would hurt your mum? He shrugged again. I don't really know him. What's he doing here? Isn't he your mum's boyfriend? Hector nodded. Moro thought he meant that he didn't want Robin to be there, rather than his presence was confusingly pointless. On the phone this morning you said, we don't know where they've taken her. What did you mean? I don't know. Why do you think someone's taken her? Why not that she's just run off? He found it hard to articulate, but eventually held his hands up at the room. Why are we here? In Glasgow? What are we doing here? It was an astute question. Long-serving police officers were wondering the same thing. He was rocking back and forth, nearly crying. He couldn't talk anymore, could hardly catch his breath. Moro patted his hand, felt a strong urge to lie and tell him everything would be all right. I'm going to ask your sister about the argument in the car, okay? He hummed warily at the door, steeling himself. Moro got up and went across the hall, knocking and opening the doors simultaneously. She found Martina standing by her bed, waiting. Her manner was imperial. Martina, can you tell me what your dad said on the phone that made your mum so angry? Nothing. Martina's voice was flat. He didn't say anything. They looked at each other for a while. Finally, Moro broke the silence. Why did you call us if you don't want help? Get us away from Woka. Martina was crying a little now. Not like Hector, though. It was controlled, as if she was squeezing it out. Are you afraid of Robin? No. Do you think he had anything to do with your mum? No. You don't think he hurt your mum? She couldn't bring herself to say that. She slumped down on the bed, defeated. No. What do you think has happened? She calls at 4:15 when we get in from school normally. We were worried when she didn't call, but maybe she was driving. Why would she be driving? I think she drove to London to see Auntie Maria. I think she gave her a fucking ear bleed. Moro took a moment to navigate her way through the teen speak. Was she angry with her? Martina shook her head. She was angry about nothing. Literally nothing. She went crazy. What did he say? What exactly? But he hadn't said anything. Auntie Maria said you're doing geometry. Literally that boring. She was a child whose mother was missing, and she'd been dumped on an unloved stepfather, but still Martina didn't evoke sympathy, not like Hector. She was beautiful, privileged, but bitter and angry, as if she had everything but couldn't fucking believe she wasn't getting more. You got your brother to call us, why not call yourself? She shrugged carelessly, as if she just couldn't be bothered, but Hector had been listening and called out from his room. She was crying so much she couldn't speak. Martina glowered at the door. Has your mum ever left you before? Never. She spat the word. She has never, ever left us before. Mummy is fierce about us, so I know there's something wrong, otherwise she would have phoned. Well, she has left and she hasn't phoned. What do you think could cause that to happen? Martina chewed her cheek, looked tired. she's in trouble," she whispered. "What sort of trouble?" But Martina's chin trembled and she dropped her face to hide it. Mauro saw then that she wasn't mean or haughty. She was just a child who didn't know where her mum was, and she was scared. Fear with its makeup on. "Money trouble?" She gave her lap a tiny nod and then glanced up at McGrain, pleading with them not to press it. Mauro didn't want to ask. Incriminating evidence from children looked bad, especially if they had been questioned without an adult present. They could ask her to elaborate eventually, if they needed to. Mauro held up the photograph from the botanics and pointed out the mysterious Mr. Y. "Who's this man?" "Frank Delahunt. He's the lawyer for Mummy's business up here. He's a creepy wanker." Back in the car with McGrain, Mauro puzzled the dynamics in the family. "What do you think? Martina seems desperate to get away from Walker. Is it a child protection issue?" "Nah," said McGrain, knowing exactly what she was talking about. "Bosses wouldn't let you anyway. They've spent too much on it." He was right. Abusing stepfathers with an eye on a child often picked chaotic families, but usually with a mother they could control. Roxana wasn't that. Both the Met and Police Scotland had spent too much money on the case already to let Mauro blow it with a speculative social work intervention. A request for a home visit wouldn't make it off her desk. "She hates him," said McGrain. "He's her stepdad. The problem is that he's a child himself and he hates her back." He started the engine. "I'm a stepdad to 3. Do they hate you?" He pulled up at the lights on the busy Great Western Road. "They did, at first. Their mum thought it would never pass. Your job was just not to react. It was easy for me. Mine are diamonds." Mauro looked out of the window as the lights changed and they drove on. She didn't think Roxana Fuentesilla would walk away from her kids. But Mauro had to face the possibility maybe she didn't know her at all. Maybe all the good stuff was just projected hope. Chapter 10. Ian tripped downhill along streets of high hedges around big houses. He felt conspicuous, imagined householders spotting him through their windows and stopping to neighbourhood watch him. He knew a lot of the town, but nobody from up here. The big house people were often incomers. They kept themselves separate, above, geographically, socially, even in the elevated seating positions of their high-up cars. Ian's only contact with them was through their cleaners or childminders, or if he met their gardeners in the pub, or if they approached him for a deal. Susan Grierson made sense now. She'd probably ask him to recommend a cleaner when he got back. He turned eastward, heading for Tommy's mum's. It was helping his mood, having a thing to do. Even walking was helping him keep focus. The slap of his feet on the pavement drowning out the physical sensations of the morning. He stopped to curb, heard a seagull in the distance and remembered the rough dock pressing hard on his knee, the warm wet of her breath on his lips. He hurried across the empty road without really looking, eager to get moving again. 5 blocks down, he arrived at Tommy's mum's tenement. The window frames were peeling. Someone had emptied an ashtray from their car into the gutter just outside. The entry door was propped open with a broken brick. He walked into the concrete close and the familiar smell of damp and sea and air. Tommy lived with his mum, Elaine Farmer, in a disabled access flat on the ground floor. Lainey had bad knees. Ian had known her for a long time. He flicked the letterbox a couple of times, the metallic clack ricocheting from the stone walls of the close. He listened. A footfall, a door creak. He could imagine Elaine standing still inside, wondering. Finally, she called out, "Who's it?" Ian leaned into the joist where the door would open. "Me, Elaine." Pause. "Ian Fraser," he said. She shuffled across the hall and opened the door a crack, peering out with one eye. "Keep hearing you're back." She opened the door to let him in. God, she was old and heavy. One good thing about prison food, it was hard to get fat. She had a purple t-shirt on, too small. It was gathered around her middle. Her thin blonde hair was tangled at one side. Lainey had not grown into her looks. If anything, she'd grown out of them and she wasn't looking after herself. Her grey skirt was ripped at the hem where it had caught on something. Her legs were bare and her calves bulged with black veins, as if she was already full of worms. She wore slippers shaped like black and white footballs. Ian stared at them to spare himself the sight of her. "Footballs. Like 'em. Tommy got me these for Christmas. Comfortable." She dropped her voice to a sensual murmur. "What you doing here, Ian?" Ian and Lainey had a night a long time ago. A high point for her, a low point for him. Ian wouldn't let her know he felt that way, though. She'd never been very attractive, but she was nice. "Kinda looking for Tommy, Lainey. Looking to buy?" She tutted reprovingly. "Not for yourself." Ian was known for his abstemiousness. It made him stand out. "No." He gave a sheepish smile. "Just for a friend." "Oh." She looked down the close. "Tommy's out now, but seeing as it's you, much you after?" $3 grand. He held up the money. It was more than a pinch, but Susan had given him the price plus half again to get it. "Come on in, well." Ian didn't want to be alone with Lainey in an empty house. He wanted to keep on walking, actually. Stay moving, stay outside. But he couldn't think of a good excuse, so he slipped sideways into the hall, flattening himself against the wall by the door as she shut it. "Well, my God, Ian Fraser." She stepped back to look him over. "You get better looking every time I see you." She reached forward to touch his chest and Ian flinched away. He couldn't be touched today, not by her and not there. She was hurt. He mumbled an apology. No. She dropped her hand. "You're entitled." She glanced down at her slippers, lifting a hand to touch her messy hair. He could see that she was blaming herself, finding the faults in her appearance. "Lainey, it's been a hell of a day." "Fair enough, Ian. Just saying." She tried to smile warmly but dropped it and turned away, casting a saucy look behind her. "Just wouldn't kick you out, if you know what I mean." Ian stayed where he was and watched her shuffle down the hall. The ridiculous slippers made her look as if she was dribbling the two footballs. He pressed his hands to the wall behind him and waited. He could hear her rifling through a drawer.
End of CD 2. CD 3.
He remembered the hallway being bigger than it was. He slid across it in his socks before dawn, trying not to make a noise as he left. Tommy was at his dad's, the house empty, but Ian had started at the sound of a pipe, clanging as it came to life. He hurried across to the door, saw Tommy's school bag and trainers in a pile by the cupboard, and thought they were his own for some reason, and stopped. Lainey was at the bedroom door before he got moving again, and she took him back to bed. They tried again, and again he couldn't. She was too raw. Even when he shut his eyes, all he could see was her face, her broken veins, her drunken smile. The second time he came out of the room into the hall, Lainey called after him that she wouldn't tell anyone. It was their private business. He shouldn't be ashamed. Ian wasn't ashamed. He'd have been more ashamed if he'd been able to. It would have been meant he was blind to the smog of need and lies around her. She didn't want it either. They called it sex because they didn't have the words for what they needed. They were both looking for a hand to hold in the dark, a friend, a makeshift mooring. In the back room now, Elaine slammed the drawer shut. She came back out, cellophane wraps in her hand. Tommy's already bagged them into grams. Ian gave her 2/3 of the money. Very efficient. Aye, small businessman of the year, all that shite. Ian opened the door. She knew he wanted to get away. He'd hurt her and wished he hadn't, but he couldn't think how to make it okay, so he just walked away. Ian, she called after him down the close. Ian turned back. Not want to stay for your tea? I'm making Tommy's anyway. He didn't want to see Tommy. Shepherd's pie? She said, as if that was what was worrying him. Nah, you're all right, Lainey, but thanks, love. He stepped away. Ian? He turned back once more to look at her, keeping his body to the door. Ian, I can see. Lainey drew a line down her cheek. She knew he'd been crying. She blinked slow. Sympathy, the vain hope of connection. That's why he went with her before. Ian shook his head. Please don't tell Tommy. She shrugged a shoulder. I won't say. Grateful, Ian lifted a hand to wave. Puzzled, Lainey squinted at his fingers. What? Ian looked at his own hand. What's that? She looked at his hand and touched her own fingertips. Stained brown with blood. He hid his hands behind his back. She shouldn't be looking at that. She was nice, Elaine. She was a nice person. Nothing. He backed out of the close. Ian, she called. Anything. Just phone me, okay? Will do, Lainey. You're a star. Ian didn't have a phone. He was ashamed of that. Not that he couldn't afford one, but every time he got out of prison, the technology had moved on so much he couldn't catch up. He hurried away from her, into the west, slowing to a panting walk because of the weight of the smoking on his lungs. It was a deceptively steep climb to the posh bit. He stopped to catch his breath. Too much had happened to fit into one day. The day before had been so calm. She sat where they put her, in Ian's room, calm on the low-down stool. They bought in a curry. She chose buttered chicken and ate it with a plastic spoon. Sometimes, when Tommy spoke, Ian saw her looking at them, smiling as if she was part of the conversation. She saw no threat in them. Right up to when they were walking through the yellow sand, when he saw the apple of her cheek tight and round, smiling as they led her to the dock. As if she didn't mind. She was like a holy martyr. He leaned over his knees, breathing deep. Maybe she didn't mind. He stood up, hands on hips. He looked out over the sea. If someone was going to kill him right now, he didn't think he'd mind. Maybe that was how she'd felt. The thought cheered him until he remembered her screaming and fighting and almost making it to the trees. He headed back up to Susan's dirty house. Stepping through the overgrown hedge around the front garden, he saw her watching for him through an arrow-slit window at the side of the front door. Ian dropped his head as he walked up to the opening door, wondering what the fuck it was with Susan, and realising that he didn't care. These women weren't his problem. He should get away and be alone. She let him in, not even looking at his face. "Put it down there," she said to the dresser. Ian put the wraps on the sideboard. Susan stayed at the door, waiting for him to leave. The Coke was what she wanted, and it was all she wanted. She nodded the way out. "Sorry you're upset today. Was it because I mentioned Sheila?" Ian looked at his feet. "Yeah," he said. "Sheila." She reached out and squeezed his upper arm like a witch testing him for the pot. "So brave," she said, cold now that she had what she wanted. Ian looked at her. She didn't care about anything but getting him out of there. "Why's this house so dirty?" "I beg your pardon?" "You weren't here, were you? She died on her own." "Sorry." He looked back into the dirty kitchen. "Fucking look at this place. She died in here, didn't she? And you've just got back." Susan was surprised, amused even, as if she'd been walking a dog and then it looked up and spoke to her. "Oh, but my mother died, and I'm sorting through her affairs." "Alone," he said, his lips tight with the effort of being so vicious. "She died alone in here, so don't think you can talk to me as if I'm some kind of arsehole. At least Sheila knew I wanted to be there." Susan's eyes were narrowed now. "But you weren't there, were you? You were in prison." She was goading him, chin out, eyes slits, and Ian wondered out loud, "How the fuck would you know that?" Suddenly embarrassed, she tried to herd him out of the door. "Just get out." Ian didn't move. "How'd you know I was in prison?" "Mum told me." It was possible. Her mother might have told her that. But she looked caught out, as though she had given something away. "Have you been following me or something?" "Just go." Did she have a crush on him? No, it wasn't that. But why would she know that then? "Are you a cop?" She didn't react, so it wasn't that. He looked down to the kitchen. She was definitely hiding something in the house. "Is there someone in there?" She pushed at him. "Get out!" Ian half called out because she didn't want him to. "Who's in there?" It was so sudden. Her foot shot out in a judo move, curling around his calf, throwing him off balance, and she shoved at the same time. Ian tumbled out of the front door and into the garden. The door slammed shut in his face. Through the dirty window at the side of the door, he saw her shadow hurry down the passageway to the back of the house. He stood for a minute, waiting for the surprise to subside, and then he asked the peeling front door, "Who the fuck are you now?" Chapter 11. They were assembled around the same table in the same sterile meeting room. Morrow gave her report in bullet points. A transcript of the entire Walker interview would be available tomorrow morning. The Fuentesilla kids made the missing persons call this AM. The bank had been contacted and were checking RF's account for withdrawals. Traces were being conducted for the mobile phones. Mr. Y is Frank Delahunt. Family report that he is the company lawyer. They were tracing him right now. Walker had consented to allow them access to the office. They were currently looking for officers with forensic accounting diplomas who were available tomorrow morning. They'd get them into the Injury Claims for You office and gather as much intel as possible. She continued. Martina Fuentesilla suggested that Roxana might have driven to London to confront Maria Arias. There had been some suggestion of a possible romantic connection between Maria and their father, Manuel Vicente. In conclusion, still missing, still no reason to suspect foul play. She looked up. That was about it. Somewhat glassy-eyed after listening to her report, C.S. Saunders pushed a sheet of paper over to her. It had a photo on it, a security shot of Roxana from inside a cash machine. The bank had sent the JPEG as Mauro was driving here. Fuentesilla had withdrawn cash from an ATM yesterday at 2:20 in the afternoon. It was in Stone, Staffordshire, 4 hours south of Glasgow down the M6. She took out 50 quid and there had been no charges to the card since then. Her normal pattern was 50 quid a day. So, concluded DCC Hughes, Martina is correct. Roxana was on her way south. The car GPS had been traced all the way down to the M1. Just after the cash withdrawal, Fuentesilla had pulled into a car park in Luton and the tracker was turned off manually. Mauro looked at the cash point picture. It was taken from an unflatteringly low angle with a fisheye lens. Her mouth was slack as she punched in her pin. Her hair was in disarray, her eyes puffy. Mauro was disappointed in her. Even if Roxana had only gone to London to shout at a love rival, she hadn't phoned the kids at 4:15 to reassure them. She could have rung. She hadn't called last night either. Mauro looked at the picture again. Roxana looked frightened. Saunders and Hughes were still talking. C.I. Nolly Dent was doing his customary obsequious nod. Mauro had to turn the picture of Roxana on its face to stop her eyes straying to it. She tried hard to listen and pay attention, but was aware of her hand resting on the cheap, porous paper, of the moisture from her palm warping it. The bosses were telling each other that Fuentesilla didn't know anyone in Staffordshire or Manchester or Birmingham, the major cities nearby, so they could conclude that she was heading straight for London. Mauro should be ready to fly down in the morning to question Maria Arias before the Met heard that Roxana had been there. The Met and the Serious Fraud Office were closing in on Juan Pinzon Arias's money. A freeze on his accounts was imminent. The chief didn't want the 7 million in the Fuentesilla case being requisitioned into the Met's proceeds pot. The chief got up as he finished talking and gave them all a stern, warning look. Find the money before the Met do. Outside, Mauro gave McGrain his orders for the morning. Get this ready, trace that, bring your passport because you and I will probably have to fly to London. McGrain listened but was shaking his head, a gesture so small it seemed almost to himself. I've got tomorrow late off. Can't you change it? Kids' hospital appointment. Wonky hip. She didn't like that. We'll be back on time, she said, knowing they probably wouldn't be. Can't take the chance, ma'am. He held his breath, not at all comfortable about standing up to her. We've been waiting for 3 months for an appointment. She could insist. She wanted to. She saw herself suddenly as one of those old bastard bosses who were in charge when she was coming up, throwing their weight around because they could. Right, tell Thankless to bring his passport. I'll take him instead. But she was pissed off about it. She didn't like Thankless. Chapter 12. Boyd Fraser was in a terrible mood. He wanted to go for a pint or something, have a minute to himself. That was the problem with living somewhere small. He'd no sooner finished work than he was at his own front door. He'd got used to the rhythm of London, having an hour or so commute after work, time to decompress, read or listen to music. Here his life felt unremittingly dutiful and tedious. He crossed the steep road home and took the long way, circling the block to his house. The sky was bruised pink, the day drawing to a lazy end and a soft breeze flowing in from the sea. The warmth of the cafe lifted from him like the odour of fresh bread. Really, he was under a hell of a lot of pressure. New business, young family. He needed a break, but Lucy didn't see it that way. She wanted him home always. He circled the neighbours' grounds and arrived at his own garden gate 8 minutes after locking up the cafe. He climbed the 6 steps to the lawn. Pretty bungalow. Lovely garden. The lights were on in the front rooms. It was a modest house by the standards of the town, but not spectacularly modest. A bungalow with 4 reception rooms, 4 bedrooms, a small kitchen with the original larder and a butler's pantry. The garden was well established. The roof was in good repair. It was picturesque. The front had a panoramic view of the sea from a covered wooden porch. The Reverend Robert Fraser kept the house well until he died. Too old to undertake improvements, he had not stapled an ugly conservatory to the front porch or had plastic windows installed. No work needed doing. No ugly, dissonant changes needed reversing, which was just as well. Boyd arrived back in town with nothing but 2 sons and a wife. They had remortgaged to start the business. Amo de la Reine. Fuck. It pissed Boyd off how often that came to his mind when he looked at the house. It was spreading too. He thought about it in the cafe the other day, when someone, a middle-aged woman, naturally, bought organic local free-range eggs. It was the look she had on her face when she asked if they were local. Amo de la fucking Reine. It wasn't even part of their holiday itinerary. They might have strolled through, none the wiser, but the tour guide happened to be giving a talk in English. Lucy and Boyd made a trip around Europe the year before William arrived, in a VW van with a brand new engine. They visited the Venice Biennale, stopped in the Alps, ate and drank and fucked and danced all over Europe. The weather was perfect. The reconditioned van admired wherever they stopped. The trip was beautiful. They were beautiful. They were so full of each other that Lucy's pregnancy felt inevitable, a comma in a long, fluid sentence. But here, in Helensburgh, what lingered in his mind was that ridiculous amo. Marie Antoinette had built it in the grounds of Versailles. A grotesque. She commissioned it to escape the pressures of courtly life. It was a phony peasant village, a place where she could play the part of a country maid. She would come here, the tour guide said, and milk freshly washed and perfumed sheep into Sèvres porcelain pails commissioned for the purpose. But the amo wasn't just for her to play the peasant in. It also allowed the residents of Versailles to feel as if they were in the wild French countryside, instead of a fenced-in enclosure surrounded by starving, angry Frenchmen. Pretty bungalow. Lovely garden. He tramped across the dewy lawn to the side door. Boyd looked up, saw the soft light spill from the windows onto the damp grass. It looked idyllic. He thought of taking a picture and sending it to Sanjay. But he was always sending photos to Sanjay. Jumpers and wellies and rosy-cheeked kids, sea spray-tousled Lucy, pictures of the dogs. Sanjay's texted responses were getting shorter and shorter as he lost interest. "You lucky fucker, man, I'm stuck on the circle line," became "looks great," became "great." Last time he even replied in text speak, GR8, something they both disapproved of. It was as if he didn't care whether Boyd thought he was a prick anymore, because Boyd was a ghost to him. Sanjay would have visited if they'd moved to Cornwall. All their friends would have visited if they'd been in Norwich. It only took 2 fucking hours to get from Heathrow to Helensburgh, but no one came. Angry now, instead of snaking around the edge, Boyd stomped across the lawn. Halfway over, he felt his heels sinking into the immaculate grass. Lucy had taken on the garden and she'd be bitching about that for a month now. He walked around the back to the kitchen door, tripping the pensioner paranoid sensor lights his father had fitted. They felt like a perpetual reproach from a frightened father to his absent son. Boyd would have pulled them down if they weren't so far up the wall. Opening the back door, he let it bang off the wall, heard the kitchen noise of the kids die abruptly. Even the dog was quiet for a moment. The household was reading his entrance to gauge his mood. Annoyed by that, he kicked his shoes off, hitting the door with one of them. A sniff and a scratch on the inside door, and Boyd leaned over and opened it. Jimbo, the black cane terrier, looked up at him with worried old lady eyes, his pink tongue frozen on his lips. He willfully misunderstood the dog's concern. "Well, go on then." He motioned for him to go out to the garden. "Get out and do it, you incontinent little shit." In the kitchen, the boys laughed uproariously because their dad had said shit, and because Jimbo was in trouble and not them. Jimbo scurried past him to the dark rockery. "Don't let him go in the rockery, Boyd." Lucy was standing in the doorway, a blackened oven glove in her right hand. Isabel Moran joggies hung from her yoga-perfect hips. She wore a white t-shirt, good French cotton. A wedge of skin was exposed at her waist. Boyd wanted to kiss it. Lucy saw his lascivious ogle and smirked. "Seriously, don't let him poo in there. I'll have to pick it up." Boyd kept his eyes on her hips. "Give me 10 minutes. Lucy looked back at the oven, then at Boyd. She knew what he was thinking. "I've got a moussaka coming out of the oven. It's the boys' supper. I've spent hours." "No," he said, refusing her refusal. A look of sadness flickered in her eyes, but she blinked it into a wry smile. "Fuck off, Boyd." She went back to her oven. Jimbo was at the door, waiting for permission to come back into the house. Boyd swung his foot behind the little dog and booted him gently indoors, shutting the door to the porch. He walked into the kitchen. She'd brought the little flat-screen TV in from the bedroom, stood it on the countertop, and they were watching a Looney Tunes DVD. She was keeping the boy's eyes busy. It was far too exciting for early evening. Larry was watching and throwing his weight back and forth, banging the feet of his chair dangerously on the floor. "Daddy," William observed absently, keeping his eyes on the screen. Lucy had her back to him, her shoulders defensive as she lifted the steaming dish onto the hob. They talked about using the TV as a babysitter. She knew it was wrong. Boyd stomped over to the counter. "Put the fucking telly off, Lucy." He pressed the switch too hard, nearly knocking the flat screen over. The boys chorused their objections. Jimbo joined in, huffing loud yips, and Lucy swore at him. Boyd walked away. "It's bad for them!" he shouted, and went into the bedroom to take a shower, slamming the door. He could hear Lucy out there, screaming down the corridor, calling him a fucking wanker. Then the boys started crying because they were arguing again. Boyd wasn't sorry. He was angry and he wanted her to be angry too. He shed his work clothes on the bed, hating the spindly-legged furniture in here, the heavy padded headboard, the 3-mirrored dressing table. His mother's choice. Everything old and brown and so well made that they couldn't justify spending money, even IKEA money, to replace it. He went into the ensuite and turned the shower on, waiting for it to get hot. First thing he'd do when they made some money, have a proper walk-in shower installed instead of an afterthought over the bath. He had to huddle under the flow to get more than one shoulder wet at a time. His mood warmed as he realised what he had decided. He smiled down at the floor, letting the water run over him. He was going to have a blowout. Tomorrow, after the dinner dance, he was going to have a mental night, get wrecked, dance, whatever the fuck he wanted. And then the day after, he'd be sorry and start again. Chapter 13. Alex and Brian were slumped on the settee in a living room scattered with damp towels and small toys, nappy bags tied at the neck, toast-crumbed plates. They were half watching the news. Mostly, though, they were listening for the twins on the baby monitor. With the insight unique to those who have known otherwise, Maura was aware of her profound contentment in this moment. She felt the warmth of the nice man next to her, savoured the health of her children. She even had a cup of tea and a biscuit. She found happiness hard to recall most of the time. Misery was stickier, puzzling, more intense. But she could be happy in the moment. The twins were 13 months old, and now, from the moment she walked through the front door until she left, she was lifting, wiping, changing or dressing them. She measured every task and the distinct number of hand movements it required. Brian and Alex were almost ambidextrous now. Out of necessity, they could both feed a baby and make a sandwich at the same time. But now her hands were empty, and she was sitting down. Celebrating the moment, she reached lazily across the settee, not quite reaching Brian. "Your day all right?" "Usual," said Brian. "You?" "Same as ever. Liars and politics." "Oh, aye." Brian kept his eyes on the telly. "Spent 40 minutes this morning answering emails while the boss lectured me about how men can't multitask." The baby monitor crackled, glowing green. It sounded as if the twins were asleep, but that didn't mean they were. They were conspiracy incarnate. On the TV, a smiley man was forecasting a change in the weather. Heavy rain, danger of landslides. A debate show started. Angry audience and suited panel talking about the independence referendum. Both Alex and Brian lurched for the remote. Brian got it first and flicked over. "God," he said, "I hate this. Next office down's handing out literature and holding lunchtime rallies in the canteen. They look at your lapel before they look at your face." The fervent had taken to wearing badges declaring their allegiances, putting stickers and signs in their windows and cars. It made the vote an incessant background thrum, impossible to forget. "It's getting mental," said Morrow. "This must be what the Reformation was like," said Brian cheerfully, "at the beginning, when it was all bright hopes of the resurrection." She huffed. "I can't wait for it to be over anyway." "The Reformation?" Alex snorted a laugh. "That too." Brian grinned at her. "It's the Reformendum." "Bit of a mouthful," said Alex as her phone lit up on the side table. Unknown caller. She frowned and answered it. Alexandra Morrow? This was Shotts Prison. They had her number listed as Daniel McGrath's family contact. The officer apologised for phoning so late, but her brother had been stabbed and was in hospital. He had been operated on. He was in a stable condition. If she wanted to visit him, she needed to contact this person in that department of the Scottish Prison Service. Thank you, sorry, and good night. They hung up. Brian watched her hand drop to her lap, still clutching the phone. "What?" "Danny. Stabbed. In hospital." "He's okay?" Stable. Brian's hand found hers across the settee.
Are you all right?
Aye, she said, but too high, too fast. He squeezed her hand.
Want to call the hospital?
Tomorrow. They lay shoulder to shoulder in bed. Lazy tears oiled from Alex's eyes, running into her hair at the temples. The light on the baby monitor lit the room kelp green. An undulating ocean of sound filled the room, an ebb and swell of little boys breathing. Brian waited for a wave to crash before he spoke.
Are you crying?
She waited for the next backdraft and whispered, "A bit."
I'm sure he's okay.
She wasn't crying because she was worried about him. She was crying because, again, Danny had robbed her of the delusion of nobility. In the moment after she hung up, before Brian squeezed her hand, Alex had wished her brother dead with a fervour that was almost sexual. Not because he was a bad man. She wasn't wishing him dead for the good of the world. She wished her brother dead because he was an obligation she did not want to meet. He made her uncomfortable. It was mealy, malevolent, and she didn't want to know it about herself. Brian whispered in the green dark.
Never going to be over, is it?
She didn't answer. They shouldn't even have her number. Danny must have given it to them. She tried to believe that he'd done it to shame her, but that was a lie. Danny gave them her number because Alex was all he had. She had all of this. Brian, the twins, her job, everything. But she was all that Danny really had, and she didn't want him. She lay still, listening to the wash of the twins' breathing. They were trying to synchronise. One would snuffle, the other stumble over an exhalation, correcting themselves, trying to meet as completely as they had in the womb, but failing. Always failing. Chapter 14. It was a fraught morning. Paranoid about Danny, afraid someone would phone at an inopportune time if his condition worsened, Morrow gave in and called the prison service. They told her Danny was in the Southern General Acute Post-Surgical Ward. They couldn't tell her anything about his current condition. She'd have to phone the hospital. That probably meant he wasn't dead. She turned to her work for comfort but found none. The first item in her email was the trace that had been run on Fuentezia's mobile. It was preliminary, covering the last 48 hours only. The phone had taken the motorway south, stopped at Stone and Staffs, in the Luton car park, and then went on to Mayfair in central London, arriving yesterday in the early evening. Maria and Juan Pinzon Arias lived in Mayfair. 4 hours later, through the night, the phone was tracked coming back up the M1, making its way to Scotland. It was a 6-hour drive each way to London. It was a long time to stay angry, thought Morrow, even for Roxana. She didn't look angry in the ATM photo. Fuentezia arrived in Glasgow and, avoiding her house, passed the airport and took the Erskine Bridge across the Clyde estuary to Argyll. At 5 o'clock this morning, she made a call from a hillside outside Helensburgh. The call was to the landline of a Mr. Frank Delahunt out in Helensburgh. Then the phone went dark. Morrow mapped the site of the phone call. It was from a bare field on the coast road, a mile outside the town. The second email was from D.S. Saunders, warning her that the Met had been notified about the missing persons call. They'd been CC'd on Fuentezia's phone trace, had decided to handle the Arias angle themselves. She wasn't getting a jolly to London. Met officers would visit Maria Pinson Arias and her husband in their Mayfair home this morning. Met officers would be offered fancy dan tea and doubtless biscuits. Meanwhile, Morrow was charged with checking out the site of the phone call. She was to stand on a rainy hillside, wading through the rain in a cowshit, looking for bodies and/or bits of telephone, and then visit Frank Delahunt. She phoned the farmer who owned the field. David Halliday sounded old and gruff. He lived next to the field, worked the farm alone, he said. And he'd heard something. He'd woken up at 5 o'clock yesterday morning to his dogs barking. That meant someone was there, which was rare enough because the road was a dead end. He went back to sleep, but they kept barking on and off. He'd seen headlights on his ceiling. 2 cars, he thought. The dogs kept on barking, though. Morrow asked what that meant, and he said he didn't know. The dogs never said. Mr. Halliday sounded like a bit of a laugh. Going to visit him might take the tinge off the melancholy morning. She hung up and went into the incident room to ask McGrain about his kid's hospital appointment. She was feeling low enough without scheduling in a morning listening to Thankless talk shit. As she walked in the room, she scanned for anyone else who had been fully briefed, but Thankless was all there was. He looked up hopefully at her, not yet aware that he wasn't being flown to London for the day. He watched with open-mouthed anticipation as she spoke to McGrain across the room. McGrain said he had to be back here by 2:15. She was only going to Helensburgh now. She could still take McGrain, but it would be a tight turnaround. "There's a call, ma'am." DC Kerrigan, a blonde woman with very jaggy teeth, handed her the phone. "Mr. Halliday from Lurbrack's farm calling you back." Mr. Halliday sounded out of breath. "Listen, pet," he said. He'd just been out and followed one of the dogs around the back of the big shed. He found a car. It was black and big, and it wasn't his, and there was no one in it. Roxana's car was black. Morrow told him to touch nothing, please keep the dogs in, and she'd be there in half an hour. Scene of crime might be called if they found a body. McGrain was out of the question. She motioned to Thankless to come. He stood up, smirking, and pulled his passport out of a drawer. "No, we're not flying to London," she called across to him. "We're driving to Helensburgh." The incident room enjoyed that. It took her 15 minutes in the car to remember why she disliked him so much. Thankless was aggravatingly declamatory. Sometimes he was right. She couldn't insist that he wasn't, but it was the way he said things. She filled him in on the morning's developments as they drove out to Helensburgh. "The Met'll get the proceeds," he announced as they passed the Erskine Bridge. "Our chief hasn't got the pool." She ignored that. Fuentesilla had been traced to London. "She's run off with a boyfriend." She tried to denote her annoyance by leaving a pause, but he was undeterred. "Spanish women are Fucking shut up! You're just burbling. It's bad police work. Wait for the facts. Let things become clear. Keep an open mind, for fuck's sake." Thankless's eyebrows rose high and stayed there. Alex looked out of the side window. She'd done it again. Another stranger met, another friend made. She had a bit of an anger problem. It was her problem, she reminded herself, not his problem. People were allowed to be annoying. They drove on in silence until the sharp turn-off to Lurbrack's farm. It was on the side of a steep hill, a mile before Helensburgh, overlooking the broad Clyde estuary. "Here," said Morrow, and they took the turn. Hedged on either side, the bumpy road led up to a cluster of run-down farm buildings set around a house. The farmhouse had "Yes" referendum campaign signs in each of the high windows, white on a pale blue, propped against the inside of the glass. Thankless nodded at them.
He's got guts, he proclaimed. It's pretty much solid no voters out here.
The problem was hers, not his. She grunted and Thankless took it to mean, really? Do elaborate, you interesting and knowledgeable man. So he did.
Yes, want to shut the nuclear sub-base. They're saying the housing market will collapse out here. Prices are frozen now.
A Ford Fiesta, a city car, was parked up ahead. Morrow had been told the forensic photographer would visit the scene and guessed it was hers. The fact that she was here at all was down to Pinad. Fuentezia's body hadn't been found, just her car. She shouldn't really be here at all. Thankless parked behind it, and Morrow was shocked to see a "No Thanks" campaign sticker in her back window. It was a contentious issue. The photographer might as well have turned up wearing a football strip. Morrow got out into a fresh shower of warm rain and pulled her coat around her, stomping up to the farmhouse. 2 dogs heralded their arrival with a chorus of unthreatening barks. An older dog, grey-haired with a cataract in one eye, looked out of the open-sided barn and disappeared back into the dark. Mr. Halliday came out, flanked by his milk-eyed companion. He shouted at the noisy young dogs, "Shut it!" He looked older than he sounded on the phone. A weather-beaten man in his 60s or 70s, the curvature of his belly accentuated by the ribbed jumper straining over it. He looked at Morrow with a cheeky twinkle in his eye.
Is it you?
Aye, smiled Morrow.
Is that you? I suppose it is.
He turned his attention to Thankless.
And who's this one?
Thankless smiled beneficently and held his hand out.
I'm DC Thankless of Police Scotland.
Halliday showed his brown teeth a little bit aggressively and shook Thankless's hand.
Well, son, I'm me of here.
They uncoupled their hands and Halliday turned to Morrow.
So, I'm saying, I was asleep yesterday morning. That's my bedroom up there.
He pointed to a small window at the top right of the farmhouse.
Until about 5 o'clock. Dogs woke me up, barking. They did it another couple of times.
You didn't get up, though? His hand strayed to the dog's head.
The dogs always get up afore me. I was up late, watching Breaking Bad. Have you seen it?
No.
I'll tell you what, he nodded solemnly. Certainly make you circumspect about what you stick your nose into.
Argyll and Bute was one of the safest areas in the country, but she could imagine Mr. Halliday cowering under his covers, watching headlights stroke the Artex on his ceiling. Mr. Fear of Crime.
Not that I've got anything worth robbing, mind. I thought all farmers were millionaires.
Mr. Halliday huffed at that.
Did you indeed? You've been listening to the Archers, maybe. I never used to worry, but, you get old, you get scared.
I'm not old, said Morrow, and I'm scared all the time. He liked that. He pointed up to his yes window signs and confided,
There's people about here would burn you out for that.
Tempers were running high, she knew that, but there was a lot of paranoia, and both sides were vying for gold in the coveted victim stakes. I thought it was a blanket no out here.
Oh, it is. It is indeed.
He looked over her shoulder as if no assassins might be hiding in the hedgerows.
Because of the property prices.
You're not worried? He looked at her defiantly.
Nah, I'm not scared. Lots of them out here are, though, protecting themselves. You wouldn't believe it. And they're nasty. The council are a bunch of masons. They've let the No Mob set up a campaign gazebo in the square. No planning permission, nothing.
It seemed an oddly comedic thing to object to. Have you been threatened by anyone in particular?
No, just in general.
He shrugged and smiled.
I'm retiring. I'll say what I like. And I don't care if I lose out personally, if Scotland can finally...
No. Morrow held her hand up. Please, no. She couldn't live through another monologue about politics. Everyone in Scotland had one ready. Mr. Halliday misunderstood and nodded.
I know, 'cause you're the police. You can't get involved.
She let him believe that and showed him the picture of Roxana's face from the Orchid House picture, singled out and enlarged. He didn't recognise her. What sort of car did you see pulling out? He stepped down into the road and pointed at the photographer's car.
See that red one there? That kind, but silver.
Hoping he couldn't see the window sticker, she stepped back and looked. It had a distinctive indent in the side panel, like a shadow under a cheekbone. You didn't happen to get the registration number?
Afraid not.
Where's the black car you found? Mr. Halliday led them to a field and lifted the chain off the gate, walking the gate back into the yard to let them in. He led them along the fence to the back of the shed. The black Alfa Romeo 4C Morrow had been watching footage of for 3 weeks was blocking the entire lane by the field. It was hidden from the road and the farmhouse. She could see why Mr. Halliday hadn't found it for a day. It was in a space so small Roxana would have had trouble climbing out of the driver's door. They walked over to the fence to look in.
I'll leave you to it,
said Halliday, and went back to his dogs. No blood, no handbag, nothing out of the ordinary. Morrow pulled on a plastic glove and tried the back passenger door. It was unlocked. The photographer was stepping cautiously over the muddy field towards them. She'd already photographed inside the car, she said, and then gone uphill for wider shots of the situ, but she was on the clock and had to leave. Everything was about the numbers these days. Was the car unlocked when you found it? Yeah, you might want to look in the glove box as well.
OK.
Morrow watched her walk away before she remembered. Hey, lose the no sticker. You're on police business. The photographer rolled her eyes. I'm so sorry, my car broke down. It's my dad's car. Well, cover this sticker up if you're using it. I'm a yes anyway, she said. Yeah, well, I don't want to know your private business. Just cover the sticker up. The photographer nodded and backed away. Morrow turned her attention to the car. For a Londoner to leave their car door unlocked probably meant Roxana had stayed nearby. It meant she intended to get back in. Feeling suddenly very cold, Morrow told Thankless to go and check the field for phones or anything at all. He went off and she lifted her coat, stepping over the wire fence. She opened the car door, reached in and let the glove box fall open. A blue freezer bag with Waitrose printed on it. It was secured with a white wire, a bulge of white powder in the corner. The contents box hadn't been filled out, but she could guess. She bagged it up as evidence and looked at the floor for anything else. It was strange. Roxana had driven for 12 hours through the night, but the floor was almost sterile. There were no stray blonde hairs, no pastry flakes, no single blade of grass dragged in on the sole of a shoe. It had been vacuumed. Morrow looked at the door and the steering wheel closely, checking for fingerprints or palm smudges. Both had been wiped clean. She squinted at a residue on the door handle. Alcohol wipes. She knew the sort of marks they left because they used them on the fingerprint machine at the station after someone had been brought in and charged, always aware of the danger of Hep C transmission. They had to use alcohol sanitizer a lot in their uniform days, and it was rough on the hands. Morrow could still remember the raw fingertip feel. She shut the door carefully and phoned the station. Get a forensic tow truck out here right now and send McGrain and Kerrigan. She needed bodies to escort evidence into the station. Airtight cases fell on the basis of faulty chains of evidence. She could already hear a lawyer cross-examining Mr. Halliday.
And the car was left unlocked by a field for how long?
Thankless was in the field, slowly walking away from her as he scanned the ground beneath him. She walked over to him. Find anything?
No, thank God.
He was relieved not to have stumbled across anything gruesome. But Morrow felt that maybe she had. The alcohol wipes suggested premeditation. They were ominous. Most people would use the sleeve of their jacket to wipe the prints off. She straightened up and suddenly saw the spectacular view. A lush, green run of fields dropped down to meet the glinting water. The hills rose, green again on the far bank. Smiling, she looked down the coast to her right and saw Helensburgh laid out in a neat grid, the rain-drizzled roads silvered by sunshine.
I actually know Helensburgh really quite well.
He was telling her he was an asset. She didn't want to encourage him, so she just looked away. Yeah, it's old.
Actually, no. It's only 300 years old. It was built as a luxury holiday town. The founder named it after his wife.
I know. She didn't know that, but he was interrupting her train of thought. He tried to impress again.
Did you know 1/4 of all the millionaires in Britain lived there at one time?
That was quite interesting, if irrelevant. Morrow stayed silent. She looked over to where the street grid ran out and big trees and lawns intermingled up the early slopes of the surrounding hills.
I know it well because I was in the Sea Cadets. We went sailing over there at the outdoors centre.
He pointed to a distant coppice of masts. Morrow nodded in the right direction, thinking about the alcohol wipes. Buoyed by her lack of hostility, Thankless asked,
Were you in the Cadets?
No, said Morrow.
It was great. I loved it.
She wondered why they were talking like this, exchanging personal information as if they were friends. It was the setting. Being near the water made the trip feel like a holiday.
Do you know that area of Helensburgh up by the...
Never been. She cut the comradely thread abruptly with, We were Largs people, and headed for the car. She glanced back and saw Thankless looking sheepishly across the water to Largs. The two towns were on opposite banks of the wide estuary, each looking diffidently away. Helensburgh was 300 years old, pretty and stood in its dignity. Largs was 1,000 years old and didn't care what anyone thought. It had seen Viking battles and German bombers, the Black Death and the EU. It was a place of ice cream parlours, vulgar amusement arcades, chips and sweets and pocket money toys. It was a working class day out. Helensburgh was aspirational. He caught her up at the car.
Well, if I win the lottery, I'd live out here. All that fresh air.
I don't like the country, said Morrow.
Why?
He was smiling at her, surprised and patronising, about to explain why she was so very wrong and the country was a great thing. The shops are shit, she said. Anyway, cut the chat. You phone the station and make sure Kerrigan's bringing the forensic team. Kerrigan was. Morrow knew she was. She was just giving Thankless a job to do to remind him she was in charge. She walked away, glad to have shut him up, but disappointed in herself. It was her problem. She'd hated bosses for behaving like this to her. She hated them for doing it now. She thought of DCC Hughes walking out of the meeting before people had finished speaking. Back at the gate, Morrow glanced once more at the beguiling view. Wind rolling up from the water swept a soft Mexican wave across a rapeseed field. Morrow felt in her gut that Roxana was probably dead. Alcohol wipes and a handheld vacuum for the floor of the car. It was professional and it was serious. There were no professional hitmen in Helensburgh, just fat men in tracksuits stabbing rivals for a fist of 50-quid notes. A professional would have been conspicuous in such a small community. She took out her phone and called CI Nolly Dent. Chapter 15. Leaving the lunchtime rush in the cafe behind him, Boyd Fraser began to run, heavy-footed. He had 40 minutes before he had to begin preparations for the charity dinner. He blamed his trainers at first, then remembered that he always blamed the trainers, that he didn't actually like running. He ran straight west, staying away from the unbroken shore road to give himself an excuse to stop at the crossroads and catch his breath. The black asphalt glistened, and an electric car startled him as it ghosted past, wheels hissing the rain from the road. He wasn't enjoying the run. The wind annoyed him. Cars and pedestrians got in his way, everything hurt. He had been very fit once, running the London Marathon. He even beat his training partner's time by 3 minutes, something Sanjay never really forgave him for. Now Boyd was always comparing himself to that never-again peak of fitness. But he ploughed on, passing rustic houses, sailing houses, the entry gate to a neo-Gothic castle. He felt his shoulders rounded from leaning over work surfaces and account books, from picking up kids and crates of milk. Meeting Miss Grierson yesterday had disturbed him. It created in his mind an unbroken timeline between then and now, as if he had never been to UCL, or spent 15 years in London, or campervanned or surfed in Cornwall, as if he'd always been here, and Lucy and the kids had magically appeared in the town of his birth. While he was away at university or on his travels, he'd cast himself unhappy in Helensburgh, trapped by the obsessive propriety of his home life, the coldness of his father. The dry Sunday school days, crayoned pictures of Jesus, the smog of family history and the weight of expectation. They were the good Frasers, the righteous elect. His mother thought that everything that went her way was part of God's plan. Everything else was the work of Catholics and Anglicans. But meeting Miss Grierson took his mood back to that time, reminded him of what growing up here was really like. It was quite pleasant. His parents were kind and gentle people, bigoted, a little rigid, but well-meaning. The desire to rip things up, the bitterness, the sneering, those were Boyd's own. He wished he hadn't given Miss Grierson a job tonight. He didn't want to see her again. Boyd puffed on, troubled by the realisation that he had never really suffered terribly much and should be happy. But he wasn't. Whoever's fault it was, the fact remained, he wasn't. He felt sorry for himself. He felt cheated of something vital and he didn't know what it was. He shook his head as he approached a road, shrugging off a thought. Why did he feel so sorry for himself? He couldn't remember. He stopped at the curb. Lucy. Lucy was pissed off all the time. It was the pressure of work, starting a business, sleeplessness because of the kids. It was one of those. Feeling relieved as if he made sense again, he ran on. It was the pressure of court life. Marie Antoinette. He was back to the fucking ammo again. Annoyed at the intrusive thought, at his weak legs and his weight gain, he turned and ran downhill towards the water, stopping to let a Waitrose van pass. Fucking Waitrose stealing customers and allergy bastards. Waitrose turning the whole town into a retirement village for bank managers. Fueled by anger, he was going quite fast now. He thought back to Sanji and the jagged, competitive edge between them. That's what he missed. A spur to get him to his personal best. A peer group. That's what he needed. As if the universe had heard him, he looked up and saw, almost half a mile away down the shorefront, a man he vaguely recognised. The man was facing Boyd, leaning against an electricity substation. His head was shaved, he wore a tracksuit zipped up over his belly, a cheap gangster, and he was smoking in a louche, cowboyish manner. Boyd knew him, but not from the cafe, just from seeing him around the town. He couldn't fit a name. Boyd found he was sprinting towards the man. He could get some sniff from him, or at least he'd know someone. A chemical adventure. Maybe that would do it. A little blowout. He slowed as he approached and caught the gangster's eye, stopped to catch his breath and nurse a stitch. The two men stood parallel but apart, nodding hellos. "Right," panted Boyd. The cowboy nodded and pushed himself off the wall, hips first, then back and shoulders, finally pushing himself upright by the base of his neck. "I know you, do I?" asked Boyd. The man dropped his cigarette, grinding it into the ground with a twist of his toe. "Who are you?" "Boyd Fraser." Boyd needed a breath then, and by the time he'd caught it, the moment for asking the cowboy's name was past. "Fraser?" The cowboy was smirking, as if he couldn't quite believe it. Fraser was a well-known name in the town. "Aye." Boyd didn't usually say aye. His mother wouldn't stand for that sort of language. "I know a Fraser." He walked over to Boyd. For the briefest moment, Boyd thought he was about to hit him. Instead, he stopped, tilted his head and said, "Who's your da?" Boyd turned square to him. He was taller than the man, wider on the shoulders and fitter. "Reverend Robert Fraser." "Those ones? You own that cafe? That puddle place up at Sinclair Street?" "Paddle, aye." The cowboy looked serious and held out his hand. "Tommy Farmer." English name, cross-border accent, but chubby Scottish build. A Navy kid. Boyd shook it. "All right, man." He didn't quite know how to broach the subject of where to get a deal. "Hey, I don't suppose you'd know..." But Tommy had spun away. "Murray! Murray Ray! Imagine bumping into you." Boyd had been only vaguely aware of two people ambling towards them down the shore road, but the man and the child must have changed pace, hurrying while he wasn't looking. Now they were standing near, and the man had stopped, and he looked scared. He held his daughter's hand tightly. He wore a small "I" badge on his lapel, but he was trying to cover it with his free hand while keeping a frightened eye on Tommy. Boyd understood that Tommy Farmer was the cause of the fear. He found it exciting. He shifted his weight towards Tommy, sliding behind his shoulder, implying that they were together, though they weren't. "Hiya, Murray." "Hiya, Tommy." Murray dropped his gaze, cowed. "The badge. I know Mark, doesn't he?" "Never mind that," said Tommy. "I'm a yes myself." But the badge was not the problem, apparently, because the atmosphere between them didn't improve.
Are you a yes, Boyd?
Tommy looked at him. Boyd was an emphatic no, but he could hardly say so. He kind of nodded and the men went back to looking at each other. Boyd was impatient for the father and child to move along because he had decided on his gambit. Tommy, you don't happen to know where I could get a bit of sniff, do you? He was rehearsing it in his head. He was waiting for a break. But Tommy and Murray were eyeballing an acrimonious private conversation. They wouldn't argue in front of the child because it was a small town, small enough for the children to feel like a collective resource. Grown-ups disguised their enmity to protect the kids and festered threateningly instead. But if Boyd spoke to the girl, kept her busy, the men could talk and Murray would move on. Boyd looked at her. About 10 or 11, thick specs, a pink puffer and matching woolly hat that seemed itchy. She kept scratching her head through it.
What's your name? He said.
Leanne Ray. What's yours?
Boyd Fraser.
Oh, aye. You one of the Lawnmower Frasers or the Colquhoun crowd? It was a staggeringly astute comment on his family history. Generations back, the family had split into those who lived in Lawnmower and the other side who hadn't done so well and ended up in the council flats at Colquhoun.
Lawnmower, he said.
Oh, aye. Very good. She pursed her lips and looked away. She didn't seem to entirely approve.
Murray intervened.
Our Leanne's a right wee granny grey hips, aren't you, pet? She's brought up by her grannies. The men were just watching him talk to her, not taking the opportunity Boyd was giving them. He realised it was futile and stopped trying. Tommy gestured to Murray, who was near to tears.
Boyd and Murray. You don't know each other, do yous?
Boyd, still panting a little, shook his head.
Well, fellow proprietors.
Tommy was smiling, but he looked a bit mean.
This is Murray Ray. He owns the Sailors' Rest down there.
Looking down the seafront, past the man and child, Boyd saw the squat little pub. The windows were boarded up. Outside, parked like a fleet of company cars around the back, sat 3 large skips.
Doing it up, aren't you, Murray? Must be costing you.
Tommy wasn't really asking, and Murray didn't seem to have the breath to answer. He was trembling, his head bobbing on his neck. Arm and a leg, said Leanne. Remortgaged the house.
Is that right, Leanne?
Tommy was talking to her now, not nasty, not threatening the way he was to her father.
Boy, dear,
he said, continuing the introduction as if they were old pals,
has that Puddle Cafe up there on Sinclair.
Leanne nodded, politely feigning interest. Suddenly finding his voice, Murray said loudly, You're taking a hell of a chance. Starting a business in this economy? You don't know what's going to happen, don't know who you'll offend.
Calm yourself down, Murray,
Tommy warned. But he was enjoying this, Boyd could tell. He realised that Tommy had been hiding behind the electricity substation, watching the pub, waiting for Murray Ray. You don't know who you're going to offend. Murray wasn't even pretending to talk to Boyd now. He was just shouting it to the wind. Or what'll fucking happen to you? Hearing the curse word, Leanne looked at her father, her mouth a tight little O. He muttered an apology and squeezed her hand. She accepted the apology with a small nod, but looked away and muttered, Disgraceful, to herself. And when's Mark back anyway? Murray said, wild-eyed and reckless. Is he on his holidays again? He barked a desperate half-laugh at Boyd, implicating him. Tommy leaned in, warning Murray to shut up, but the desperate man burbled on.
Hey, Boyd Fraser, were you at the bonfire up at the golf course? Leanne tried to pull her hand away from her father's. He was holding it too tight and hurting her. Murray nodded at Boyd, his face a rictus grin. Up at when? And everyone's like that. Mark Barrett must be on holiday. It didn't make a lot of sense. Boyd didn't know who Mark Barrett was. Leanne looked confused too and scratched her head again through her hat. Boyd was only half listening. His mind was on a warm, remembered night in London, dancing at 5 a.m, feeling tall and alert and on it. 50 nights conflated in his mind to one moment of total, confident certainty. You're doing the food at the dinner dance tonight, aren't you? Tommy was talking to Boyd. Yeah, he said. We're catering the hospice dinner. Great. Tommy rubbed his hands together. I'm coming. Boyd was more than pleased at that. Relieved. Tommy would be there. Tommy would probably have a little baggie on him at the dinner, or he'd know someone who did. Tommy nodded at the father and daughter. You're coming, aren't you, Murray? Aye, Murray said, calmer now, distracted. And who's babysitting you, Leanne? Granny Eunice. Not your Granny Annie? Nah, Eunice's legs giving her jip. Knees all swole. Annie's got a ticket. She shrugged. Giving the dancing a bye, though, with her bladder. It was a little freakish, hearing the words of an old person from such a small child. They all looked at her for a moment. Great, said Tommy, enunciating the T so sharply it sounded like a spiteful finger flick to the ear. The sky was darkening. Lights were coming on across the water, throbbing uncertainly. Boyd's break time was running out and the men were arguing about something he didn't understand or care about. He should go. So, yeah, said Boyd. See you later anyway. He nodded at Tommy as if they had a date. Murray and Leanne shuffled out of his way and he jogged past, gathering speed on his tired legs, regulating his breathing. He ran on, past the boarded-up pub. It looked like a bit of a dive, but the Navy base nearby meant that dives could make enough at the weekends to tide them over an empty week. Boyd ran on for 5 or so minutes, as far as the edge of town, and then turned back. He wasn't sure of the time. He found it hard to put a time on the strange conversation with the old-young girl and the 2 angry men. He ran up Sinclair Street towards Lawnmoor, a steep incline straight uphill from the water, a final push. Opening the garden gate, he stepped in and climbed the little steps. He stood for a moment, looked around the garden like a visiting stranger. The Lawnmoor Frasers. It occurred to him that in London he had had anonymity and liked it. Here in cosy, rosy Helensburgh, he was a young business owner from an old family, part of the fabric of the town. He didn't like knowing who he was so exactly. He didn't like other people having the measure of him.
End of CD 3.